All right, I am back. This is not a typical hour for me to be streaming. I am tired. Uh, I'm seeing my eyes now. They're like red and half closed. Oof. We'll see if we can get through this. But I wanted to do something this weekend besides just work, 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 work. So I almost said work, 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 work. Uh, but I told myself if I get enough work done, I'll do a stream. And I was hoping that would be at like, I don't know, 7 or 8, but 9:40 here. So here I am. I do. Someone that was very generous. I gotta double check with them again if I should give them a shout out. But someone helped me out by sending me some money to get some better equipment. So I have a mic arm that I'm going to be setting up. And I got a couple. Well, I got one other thing. I got like a pop filter, whatever it's called, which hopefully will help. I have a Blue Yeti here, so I have, I think, an okay microphone. So anyway, so thanks to that person. If they want me to give them a shout out, I forget what they said. It was a little bit ago. So hopefully we'll finally have slightly better sound quality here. But what I really need is a background. So now that I'm in a new place, I need to rearrange the place to, I don't know, have like a bookshelf behind me like everybody else does. Anyway, so nobody's here yet. Maybe this is just not a good time for me to be doing a stream, but we'll see what happens. People always watching my video. All right, one moment. So tonight I didn't really have like a whole video I wanted to review. I could start. I wanted to kind of just go through a few things. I should say there's been a lot of action over on Substack. Substack has this thing they introduced a little bit ago called Notes, and it's kind of like Twitter but on Substack, like the blog platform. And that's been pretty cool. I've been on there pretty active talking to people there, and it seems a bit less toxic. It seems like you could have productive discussions with cool and interesting people. Hey Moxie, what's up? How's it going? So what I wanted to look at today is actually various blog posts and videos. One of them, I don't think I've ever responded to Mike Winger before. Oh no, I accidentally clicked somewhere and it took me off the video I went to go to. There we go. Cool. So I'm going to respond to him because, I don't normally talk much about philosophy of religion and stuff, but he said some interesting things about religion, and why not address those, right? So I'm going to do that. Yeah, okay. So I can share that. I'll see in a second. And you know how it is, like when I do the Meta Mondays where I review videos. So that's what I'll try to be doing here. All right, here we go. Actually, give me 1 second. There we go. That's better. I really got to get more professional and smooth about doing this sort of thing, but that's okay. All right, so I was going to go over this because he makes some interesting claims. Basically what I did, I could tell you how I found this, because people often wonder, how do I find every video on moral realism? Is, hey, you put moral realism in the search bar, or you go to a video that plausibly mentions moral realism, and you control F, you search the transcript, and you look to see if somebody has mentioned moral realism, and I did. So this starts about, I think, a minute before he brings up moral realism. And he made some claims that I thought were pretty easy to raise some objections to. It's not really directly about moral realism. It's about a variety of things. Well, let's just get into the video, and you'll see what he's up to. But basically, it's talking about how he talks about how atheism is a worldview, and it has all these implications. And I don't really buy it. I don't buy it. I do think that atheism is associated with worldviews, but let's watch a bit of the video, and that'll give some context for what I have to say about this. All right, let's get into it, and let me know how the volume is in this. Hopefully it's okay.
In the video description or the podcast description below for you guys to check out. Religion is not the cause of all wars or most wars. They're not. This is simply not true. And Christianity is not the cause of all the bloodshed that you can think of and all the harm. And if only we'd had rational atheists, we would have been fine. This is a myth without actual evidential support. Others would say that atheism is not a worldview. And okay, that's partially true. Atheism is not
That's the key thing about whether or not atheism is a worldview. Let me stop and say hi to everybody, and then we'll get more into it. So Niddy's here, LOL Winger. I'm not really familiar with Mike Winger, so I'm not really sure what his deal is. But you see, he's got the good sound quality, he's got the better camera, and he's got the bookshelf. Everyone's got a darn bookshelf. And I probably need to get some decorations. I don't have a guitar, but if y'all got recommendations, I'll take them. All right, Cloud of Time is here. Good to see you. Well, several of us here at Exclusive Club. Yeah, it is. Timothy, every time I hear worldview these days, it drives me crazy. Yeah. What's the other one they say besides worldview? No, it is worldview that Christian apologists started using a lot. Oh, everyone has a worldview.
Not a worldview, totally, but it certainly impacts your worldview. Right? There are those who say
so the claim here is let's just take it back a little bit. I think he's saying atheism. Well, let's just hear it.
And okay, that's partially true. Atheism is not a worldview.
So atheism isn't a worldview.
Totally, but it certainly impacts your worldview.
It impacts your worldview. So that's a more plausible claim than saying that atheism is a worldview. That's a pretty silly claim. Like atheism, however you want to define it, disbelief in God, lack of belief in God. I'm not going to get into that dispute now. But it's pretty minimalistic in terms of what it involves, in terms of like its direct content. So saying it is a worldview is a little bit weird. But suggesting that it's associated with or that it impacts your worldview is a more plausible claim. Like if you're an atheist, does this cause you, in virtue of being an atheist, to adopt certain beliefs or be inclined towards certain beliefs? This ends up being a more complicated empirical question. I would say that it's a contingent matter, and that atheism doesn't entail, it doesn't logically necessitate any particular set of like moral views or other sorts of views. It may logically sort of it logically entails anything that necessarily follows from atheism, but and that may like leave you without certain options. Anything that requires a belief in God, you might be barred from having that belief and have that be consistent with being an atheist. But it doesn't require you to hold this specific normative worldview or this particular view. Like atheism doesn't require you to be a naturalist. Atheism doesn't require you to believe in the theory of evolution. Atheism doesn't require you to be a nihilist. So often when people will talk about atheism, even if they're just talking about it impacting a worldview, they'll suggest that it specifically leads to those sorts of views. And it's a little strange what exactly they think is going on here. But let's have a listen to see what Morty has to say.
Right. There are those who say atheists just don't believe in God, but they have no other intellectual commitments whatsoever. Like as if
the atheists have no other intellectual commitments at all. So that's not what I think people are typically claiming. It would be pretty silly to say that an atheist is just a person that doesn't believe in God. They don't have any other commitments. Why would an atheist not have other commitments? They're going to have all sorts of other commitments. The issue is whether or not those commitments are entailed or required in virtue of being an atheist. In other words, if you're an atheist, you got to think this way. This just logically follows from being an atheist. That's the sort of thing that people are typically resisting. That if you're an atheist, you got to be a moral integralist. If you're an atheist, you have to be a naturalist. If you're an atheist, you have to deny that, souls exist. An atheist doesn't even have to disbelieve in souls or ghosts or an afterlife. An atheist is someone that doesn't believe in God. Now, it may be that atheists tend not to believe in those things, but the claim here is not that atheists don't have any other commitments. Atheists can have any other set of commitments. They could, in principle, have commitments that are inconsistent with atheism. So if we're just going to talk about what commitments it's like logically possible for them to have, it would be any commitments that are consistent with atheism. They could have any of them. They're not required to adopt any particular set of positions, in lieu of some other set of positions that are also logically consistent with atheism. So an atheist could believe in souls, they could believe in ghosts, they could believe in an afterlife, they could believe in the supernatural, they could believe in all sorts of stuff as long as they don't believe in God. But it's a little weird to just say that they don't have other commitments. Sometimes you do get this, and he's probably just not being very careful with his wording here. But you will get people that seem to think if you're an atheist, like they'll say, well, then what do you believe? Now, I don't think when people ask that, they mean like, wait, so you don't have any beliefs? Like you don't believe tables exist? I don't think people are being that silly where they literally think you have no beliefs if you say you don't believe God. But when they say like, well, then what do you believe? Like as if you don't, like there's a spot where if you remove theism and you're an atheist, you just have a big hole in that spot. What do you put in the spot? I think that's closer to what people are asking when they ask this sort of question, because for many people that are theists, their belief in God isn't just a belief in God. It's often accompanied by a broader set of views about the nature of the world and their purpose and meaning and their life and their role in the world. And it's just, there's a whole bunch of stuff. There's a whole doctrine. There's a way to live your life. There's rituals. There's just so much to a person's religious beliefs. And so if if a person is like, okay, so you don't have any of that, then that is such a big part of my life. What would you put in place of that in your life? What do you do? So I kind of understand where people are coming from when they say, well, if you're an atheist, then what do you believe? But you have to be careful with your words here. Like when he suggested, like atheists have no other commitments. It's again whether or not the commitments are entailed by atheism, they're required by it.
One thing doesn't draw from the other. So there are some consequences, and some atheists, and let me say a lot of atheists recognize this and do go down this road. So on one hand, they'll say, well, there's no intellectual commitments other than.
Yeah, notice what he says here. There's consequences. So there's consequences of being an atheist. There's a lack of specificity here. What are the consequences of being an atheist? I guess we're going to hear.
Not believing in God. But there's plenty of people who will then go on to say, I deny moral realism. They don't believe that there's anything truly wrong, morally, objectively wrong, whether you like it or not, whether you prefer it or not. Right? If the whole world thought it was okay to just beat up little children for fun, it would still be wrong. Right? That's moral realism.
That's moral realism. I'm against beating people up for fun, even if the whole world is in favor of it. And I'm an anti-realist. This is such a tendentious and poor way of framing the difference between realists and anti-realists, because it pragmatically implies that if you think it would be okay if everybody thought that, like, let's go back and have a look at that.
Plenty of atheists, you like it or not, with plenty of people who will then go on to say, I deny moral realism. They don't believe that there's anything truly wrong, morally, objectively wrong, whether you like it or not, whether you prefer it or not. Right? If the whole world thought it was okay to just beat up little children for fun, it would still be wrong. Right? That's
okay. And then he says that's moral realism.
It's moral realism.
Yeah. So if the whole world thought it would be okay to beat up children just for fun, it would still be wrong. That's moral realism. What? So if you're an anti-realist, that's pragmatically implying that if you reject realism, in other words, that you think it would be okay to beat up children for fun as long as everybody thought it would be okay. I don't think it would be okay, and I'm an anti-realist. Why would an anti-realist think that? It's a very weird way of framing things. So if a bunch of other people thought something is okay, I have to think it's okay. Is it okay for them to do it, for me to do it? What are you referencing here? It's a very weird way of setting up the dichotomy between realism and anti-realism to imply that it's either moral realism or you're like some kind of weird, like a cultural agent relativist, where you think that if everyone thinks something is wrong, that makes it wrong. So if everybody thinks it's right, that makes it right. And so if everybody thought it was okay to beat people up, then it would be okay. Well, it would be a descriptive fact for an appraiser relativist that if someone or a group of people think it's okay, that they think it's okay. And so when they said things like it's okay to beat people up for fun, what they would be saying is, yeah, we approve of beating people up for fun, which would be true. I mean, that is true. If, hypothetically, if a person thinks it's okay to beat people up for fun, and then that person says something that's the logical equivalent of saying, I think it's okay to beat people up for fun, that's trivially true. So that's all an appraiser relativist is committed to. Hey, hypothetically, if a bunch of people thought it was okay to beat up kids for fun, they would consider it okay to beat up kids for fun. Trivially true. And this would be true even if you're a moral realist. So even if you're a moral realist, if a bunch of people thought it was okay to beat up kids for fun, it would still be true that they thought it was okay to beat up kids for fun. So the appraiser relativist is making a claim about what those people mean when they make moral claims. And so if they mean what the appraiser relativist thinks that they mean, then their statements are going to be true, but that has nothing to do with what you have to approve or disapprove of. This is not even adding in views like mine, like quietism, incoherentism, variablist views, error theory, Other types of expressivism with neo-expressivist or like quasi-realist views that have deflationary views of truth that would allow them to say things like, no, it's wrong to beat up kids for fun. There's like you could be an atheist that's a fictionalist. There would be various types of constructivist anti-realist accounts that would say, no, not okay to beat up kids for fun. So anti-realists, there are like, what did I just mention? Like a half dozen different views, just off the top of my head, that all have the conceptual and linguistic resources to trivially and easily object to the framing that realists are going to be ones that affirm that it would still be wrong even if everybody thought that it was okay to beat up kids for fun, but that the anti-realist is somehow deprived of the ability to say this. It's such a polemical, weak, rhetorical way of setting up the difference. It really, really frustrates me that people set things up in this way. Now I'm gonna keep listening, but I have to go take care of something real quick. So I'll be right back. One moment.
But plenty of atheists over time, they embrace atheism, then they slowly get rid of moral realism and they start trying to find other reasons to try to do stuff that they used to say was moral, and they kind of live in contradictory lives most of the time. Or they'll deny free will. Plenty of atheists actually deny free will. Because of their atheism, they do it, right? Because atheism leads to a naturalism in their view of reality. Probably the majority of atheists are naturalists because of that. So it's a worldview consequence of their belief. So they end up denying free will. Because if you're just a meat machine, electrons and protons, and you got neurons in your brain, and you got things firing that are simply outside of your ultimate control, you have no free will.
Oh God, there are so many things wrong here. So let's take this back and go through the different parts.
Then they go further and meet over time, right? If the whole world thought it was okay to just beat up little children for fun, it would still be wrong, right? That's moral realism. But plenty of atheists over time, they embrace atheism, then they slowly get rid of moral realism and they start trying to find other reasons to try to do stuff that they used to say was moral.
They try to do stuff that they used to say was moral. What exactly does he mean? Does he mean that people continue to try to sustain acting in accordance with the same moral values they had when they weren't an atheist? And there's a few weird things here. One is that he's just helping himself to the presumption that if you're a theist, then you're a moral realist. I don't know why I would share that presumption. I don't think theism entails moral realism, and I don't think it's typically the case that most theists are moral realists. A lot of even academic philosophers just scoff at this and say, well, of course theists are moral realists. Are they? Because you know what I'm going to say? That is an empirical question. And if you want to present the empirical data showing that most theists are moral realists, present it. Go ahead and present the data. Because you know what? You don't have that data. That data doesn't exist. So there isn't a bunch of data showing that theists are moral realists. And sometimes people could say all kinds of silly things to try to maintain such a view. They could say, well, it's part of the doctrine that like Christian doctrine entails moral realism. One, I'm not convinced that that's true. Like I haven't seen anywhere in any compelling scriptural reference to moral realism. Just never seen it. And two, okay, let's say you have a religious system where part of the official doctrine of the religious system is that moral realism is true. Okay, so what percentage of the adherents of that religion are moral realists? If a person says that they're Catholic, does that mean that they're against abortion? No. If it's part of a particular religion that it's morally wrong to masturbate, does that mean that members of that religion all think that it's morally wrong to masturbate? No. Probably most of the adherents of many religions don't know many of the official doctrines of their church. Like how many Catholics have exactly the sort of official take of the church on on transubstantiation? How many of them even know what it is? How many Christians understand like official non-heretical church doctrine on the nature of the Trinity? I don't know. Those are empirical questions, but you can't just infer that if it's part of the doctrine, therefore people believe it. So if I'm right, and most people don't really understand the distinction between realism and anti-realism, don't have views about this, and it's not really critical to the way that they think, speak, or act when it comes to morality, it could just be that people don't have any determinate view about this at all. I very much doubt a sort of post-Morian distinction between non-naturalist realism and then what emerged in a specific narrow band of 20th century Western philosophy, the contemporary analytic philosophy, this very small group. So like within that, like, so recently within a subdiscipline, within a particular tiny part of philosophy that is almost entirely confined to the Anglosphere of the academic world, a few hundred people at most. I mean, there's only like a half a dozen really major figures, and then a few dozen people that are especially prominent have developed the contemporary metaethical landscape. It's not that many people. So if you look at the Phil paper survey, the specialist in philosophy, in metaethics was actually pretty large. It was 13% of the 1,785 respondents. I think it was 228 respondents. At least it was 228 that responded to the question about moral realism and anti-realism, specialized in metaethics. At least say that. I don't remember exactly what the total amount of metaethics. It would be pretty weird if they did the survey if they didn't answer that question if they specialized in metaethics. So only a few hundred people responded to that, like a couple hundred that specialize in metaethics. This is not a particularly big area, but we're going to suppose that everybody going about in their everyday lives has sophisticated implicit views about the metaphysics of morality. Why do philosophers think this? So it's the same thing with free will. They think people believe in free will, and they mean the same thing that philosophers do. Why think that? I made these comparisons before. But whatever. I'll do it again. Do you think when people say, "Hey, sir, your bill will be $75," is the person that's saying that committed to Platonism about mathematics? Are they a nominalist about mathematics? You don't need a metaphysical view about mathematics. For whatever reason, philosophers seem to have this really weird, like pre-scientific, bizarro worldview about human psychology, where they think that when people use language, that they're employing concepts, and that the concepts that they employ, like if they say that this is morally good, or that's wrong, or that's morally praiseworthy, that when they use that language, well, they use the language pretty consistently. People all tend to share a common, like people within a linguistic community share a language in common. They use the language fairly consistently. They mutually are intelligible to one another and understand one another. So they all are speaking the same way. And so the presumption might go that when they're doing that, there are sort of conceptual deployment conditions to the particular words that they use. There's a concept that's being used when they use the language. And so the concept is implicitly driven by adherence to or conformity to some implicit set of principles. And those philosophical principles, they may not be consciously accessible. It's not like philosophers think if you walked up to a person on the street and said, "Hey, do you endorse non-naturalist realism, naturalist realism, or some form of anti-realism?" And then the person will go, well, of course, when I say murder is wrong, what I need to say is that there are stance-independent, irreducibly normative moral facts. And I'm attempting to make a propositional claim that, a claim that can be evaluated as true or false about the nature of those facts. And I believe that there are at least some of those facts. Of course, they don't expect people to say that, but they do seem to think that you can elicit by evaluating the ways that they think ordinary people speak, by saying, "Hey, how do people ordinarily speak?" You can sort of extract the fact that people are in some sense committed to, or in fact genuinely think that way. And so philosophers seem to think this, that people are implicitly committed to some type of substantive philosophical view. Why? Do they need to be to talk? For them to disapprove of someone's actions, to make a moral claim, to argue with people? I don't think that they do anymore. And this is what I push in my own work, is when people make causal claims, they don't have to have a view about how to interpret quantum mechanics. It's ridiculous. Why would they need it? They don't, and Michael Gill in his work says they don't, points out, hey, it would be a little weird to think that people have a commitment about mathematical Platonism or anti-Platonism. And it's not like people aren't Platonists, therefore they're anti-Platonists. They don't need any particular view at all. And this is why I have come around to thinking that people, with respect to many of the philosophical distinctions that proliferate in the contemporary analytic, so analytic philosophy is this distinctive, relatively recent Western form of philosophy that's largely confined to the Anglosphere. So it's the Anglophone world. So why would we think that the way that people happen to speak and think in academic institutes in the past 100 or so years, that the way that those people that are highly idiosyncratic, they are demographically very different from other people. They've undergone a very unusual type of education. So, the chances, if you're a philosophy professor in the United States working in a department that's predominantly analytic, that you haven't read David Hume at some point, is pretty much negligible. The chances that you haven't read a whole bunch of Plato, pretty darn low. So these are people that have read a very small and specific corpus of readings, and they've often done so in a way where their reading of them is especially intense and specific. They are inducted into a subculture. Is it any surprise, or what should it be any surprise, if the people that are part of that subculture tend to think more similarly to one another than they would otherwise? And this is not even accounting for selection effects. The people that are interested in this material and think in the ways that the people in these fields do are more likely to opt into studying in those fields. I mean, you might as well go to a group of Catholic priests and go, oh my God, look at all these Catholic priests think. This is really informative about how people think in general. That'd be a really weird thing to do, because we all know people that choose to go through like seminary training are going to be psychologically different from people that don't. And the people that receive that training are going to be psychologically different from people that don't. So why would philosophers think that they can extrapolate from the way that they think to the way that everyone thinks? And when I say everyone, I don't even mean humans. They seem to think they can just think, and that's the way aliens would think. That's the way an AGI would think. It's bonkers. It's a bonkers belief that they have. It's really, really, really silly. And it's because they have these weird pre-scientific views about agency and thinking. It's like they think that when they're engaged in this like a priori reasoning, that they are like tapping into some transcendent source of it's like pure reason that isn't in some way deeply contingent on the vagaries and the idiosyncrasies of human cognitive processes, and the not just like the suite of shared psychological processes that we all possess in virtue of our shared evolutionary lineage, but all the extra added software that gets downloaded into their brain from the peculiarities of their culture and the peculiarities of studying philosophy. It's like they are a particular software package that is highly specialized and specific, and they seem to think everybody's everywhere software just runs the same way. Why would that be true? And let's just say it was true. When have they ever demonstrated that? Because that's an empirical question. So if they want to say we don't need to do empirical work to verify whether or not people without our training or our cultural or educational peculiarities think differently, we don't need to do that work. We don't need to actually go study how those people think because they think the way that we do. You would need to first empirically demonstrate that they think the way that you do. If you do convincingly demonstrate that, yeah, go ahead. So in other words, if a philosopher could convincingly show that they don't need to do anthropological research or cross-cultural experimental philosophy to verify that pretty much everyone everywhere has the same philosophical intuitions they do, if they want to say we don't need to do all that work, they would first need to do the work to show that we don't need to continue doing work. You see what I'm saying? So if we can demonstrate that the way that they think pretty much matches the way everybody thinks, fine. Then we could stop continuing to consult what everybody thinks whenever we need to answer a question. We could just ask the philosophers. But they haven't done that. They haven't even come close to doing that. And part of the reason you could be very confident they haven't done that is because even psychologists haven't done this with basic facts about human psychology. We've done very, very little cross-cultural research. Now, I know that there's some pushback on this. Yeah, sure, there's going to be things that are pretty much the same everywhere. There's going to be things that are different everywhere. But you still got to do the work, and philosophers just haven't done that. Okay, I know I said a lot based on very little in this video, but it's very frustrating to see this sort of thing. Travis, did he say when he mentioned realism truly wrong? Did he say that? Jimothy says, did you see the Malpass-Coons debate? No. What's the debate about, and should I check it out? A lot of times says a mostly empty bookshelf with just one book, and that book has all blank pages. Is that your recommendation for what I do? I just, I really don't like, I got rid of most of my physical copies of books. I know that might sound like blasphemy to people, but I don't like physical copies of books. I want everything digital. This is a good one. Hang up all your diplomas in the background so people know you're the expert. Everything you say is correct. That just seems so pretentious to hang up all your degrees. I am planning on taking, because I have a Latin dance certificate. I want to have all my degrees because they're all framed already. But I want to empty something out of a frame or get a new frame and put that in there just to throw people off. So, oh, a PhD and master's in what? Latin dance? What? And it's not even like I have some cool diploma from doing like years. It's like a few weeks of the class. It's like nothing. I don't think I could remember any of the stuff that I allegedly learned. Okay, so Travis has said truly wrong. The way he just characterized realism is a view compatible with anti-realism. Right, right, exactly. And that's what I had ended up going into. Also, realism does not entail that. Cloud of Time says, and there are theists who deny free will because of theistic beliefs. That's true. And Moxie says, if anything, some theistic views of morality entail much more concerning consequences than atheistic moral anti-realism. I agree with that. Alien in my beverage. Alien here. Humans do not think like us. Also, this language is not English. Okay, let's continue with the video.
And they kind of live in contradictory lives most of the time. Or
already something to stop. They live contradictory lives. How exactly do they live contradictory lives? People say this all the time. Like if you're a moral anti-realist, you're somehow contradicting yourself. What exactly do anti-realists do that's a contradiction? What do they do that shows they're living contradictory lives? It's so bizarre. A lot of times, moral realists seem to think that anti-realists can't make judgments. They can't object to other people's actions. Nothing about not being a moral realist in any way suggests that you can't act on your moral principles, that you can't impose your moral standards on other people, that you can't judge other people's actions, that you can't feel guilt or shame, that you can't revise your worldview, that you can't deliberate about what kind of person you want to be. It just, all of this is available to anti-realists. And we could go through quasi-realism and various types of expressivism or non-cognitivism. We could go through how error theorists think about this, about how various types of relativists think about this, about people with views like my own think about this, about how constructivists think about this. In fact, I would say almost all, with the exception of like a really hardcore type of nihilism that includes a denial of they're just going to reject all normative value entirely, or all moral normative value, perhaps specifically. Unless you're going like all in on the nihilism, pretty much every other anti-realist position is going to have much of the conceptual resources to, if not all of the conceptual resources, to trivially handle these sorts of concerns. Some types of error theory might struggle with this. They're going to end up in some awkward positions. But most of us are not error theorists anyway, so that's largely moot. Error theorists make the mistake of buying too much into the realist framework in the first place. And so the big problem error theory has isn't that it's an anti-realist position, it's that it accepts too much of the realist position in the first place. Okay.
or they'll deny free will. Plenty of atheists actually deny free will.
Yeah, what's wrong with denying free will? I deny free will. Oh no. What are the consequences of that?
Because of their atheism, they do it.
Now that's the claim, because of their atheism. So people deny free will because of their atheism. So it may be true, like if you look at the correlation between being an atheist and denying free will, that there may be a positive correlation there. It may be that typically lots of atheists deny free will. There might even be like a time lag there where it could be that a person is a theist and they do believe in free will, they become an atheist and they stop believing in free will at some point afterwards. And there's probably a causal connection. It may very well be the case that whatever causal factors led to that person to becoming an atheist are also causally influencing that person to stop believing in free will. But that, to say that the person doesn't believe in free will because they're an atheist is a little weird. How exactly does the atheism make the person stop believing in free will? What exactly is the causal pathway there? Because in any given instance in which a person both becomes an atheist and stops believing in free will, there may be a broader causal story here about why both of those positions ended up being positions that they ended up adopting. I think it would be a little misleading to say that they stopped believing in free will because they're an atheist. It could be that they have to invoke the term that a lot of Christian apologists like, it could be that their worldview shifted, and that as a result of that worldview shift, there's been a shift that prompts them both to become an atheist and to become a free will skeptic. So it's like a third variable issue here, that there's something that's causing them to be an atheist and to not believe in free will. It doesn't mean that the atheism has to cause the disbelief in free will. So the causal pathway here might be roughly in the ballpark of what he's getting at here. It looks like he's concerned that as people move towards an atheistic perspective, like once they stop believing in God, that other things start to happen in terms of the rest of their views. That actually strikes me as fairly plausible. It's not like people just become atheists and then everything else is held constant. Typically, when people become atheists, other things come along for the ride. But it would be a mistake to say that the atheism itself is causing that. Rather, there's some other thing that's causing them to both be an atheist and to change those other views. And it could be that there's some degree of causal interaction. It could be that once you're an atheist and you stop believing in God, this changes your perspective. It sort of shifts around the whole rest of the web of your belief in ways that makes other beliefs more acceptable to you. And you may end up adopting them in a way that is causally influenced by, in part, the fact that you're an atheist. But the causal story here is almost certainly going to be way more complex than what he seems to be suggesting.
Good, right? Because atheism leads to a naturalism in their view of reality.
So atheism leads to naturalism. Does it? What does he mean by leads? So it doesn't logically entail naturalism. In fact, a lot of the atheists I know are academic philosophers that are not naturalists, and they're atheists. So it certainly doesn't entail it. Now, it would be another thing that, really what I think might be going on here is that through a variety, like people's epistemological perspective changes, they develop new epistemic tools, new meta-philosophical approaches towards thinking about things. They are responsive to, in various ways, different sorts of philosophical arguments. That might be part of it. Part of it might be that their priority shift, their value shift, their interest shift. There are changes in their emotions, changes in other aspects of their psychology that you could say are sort of non-philosophical or non-intellectual. And that whole amalgamation of shifts in their psychology and their beliefs, and these don't have to be direct beliefs about their metaphysical commitments or their moral commitments or their views specifically about free will or anything like that. It could be that they started to look at different arguments, different sources of evidence, or reconsider more fundamental aspects of their worldview or their philosophical positions. I cringe quite a bit whenever I say the term worldview. In virtue of those, it's sort of atheism tends to be downstream of that, and these other changes are downstream of that. But often it could very well be that a more naturalistic worldview sits sort of higher than the atheism position. And so they're a naturalist, and in virtue of being a naturalist, they're inclined towards atheism, and they're inclined towards these other sorts of views, like rejecting free will or whatever else, rejecting moral realism. And so I don't know why we would put atheism at the top of the hierarchy, because atheism is just I don't believe there's gods, but if you're a naturalist, you might not believe in gods because you're a naturalist. But if you're an atheist, that's not really a particularly good reason to be a naturalist, because that connection is very tenuous. It's contingent. There's nothing about atheism that it's I guess because I'm an atheist, I got to be a naturalist. But if you're a naturalist, that might incline you more towards atheism. So why does he have the causal story here where atheism is the big critical factor? It could be. It could be because there's, sort of in your sort of philosophical hierarchy, that naturalism will tend to sit on top and atheism is below that. But the causal story in practice, I'll give him some credit where this may be true, that a person doesn't become a person is a theist, right? They're a Christian, and then they become a naturalist, and they're given that naturalism is true, this creates many problems in philosophy of religion, and ultimately, I guess I got to be an atheist. So it might not be that they shift towards naturalism and then become an atheist, but that something causes them to be an atheist, and then they end up being more likely to be a naturalist. But again, it's not a matter of entailment. It's a matter of, okay, well, if you drop this whole set of views and you're picking from a different menu, and naturalism is on that menu, yeah, sure, it becomes a more attractive option that it may be easier to reconcile with atheism. So in that sense, atheism may be causally related in practice. But again, it's a contingent connection. It's not a logical.
Probably the majority of atheists are naturalists because of that. So it's a worldview consequence of their belief. So they end up denying free will, because if you're just a meat machine, electrons and protons, and you get neurons in your brain, and you got things firing that are simply outside of your ultimate control, you have no free will. Then they go further and they deny consciousness and self. Self doesn't exist. So
so far, this is sounding great to me. So they're denying all the things they should be denying. So this, I wish this were true of more atheists, that they would deny free will, deny phenomenal consciousness, and deny weird metaphysical views about the continuity of personal identity over time. Oh man, this if the things he's concerned about are exactly the kinds of things I think are awesome. So yeah, I do think that there's likely some sort of really indirect, funky causal connection here. So I don't have too much of a problem with the way he's framing things. It just seems a little bit sloppy to me.
So self's an illusion, morals are an illusion, and free will is an illusion. Daniel Dennett, famous atheist philosopher, has said rather famously, consciousness is a delusion.
Consciousness is a delusion? No. Consciousness is not a delusion. I wonder if has he actually said that specifically? Can someone look at a consciousness as a delusion? So Dennett is typically classified as an illusionist, but illusion and delusion are different terms. I don't know if he's ever said it's a delusion. I don't know if there's that much of a difference between that terminology. Maybe I'm being nitpicky.
Self is a delusion. Of course, someone has to be having a delusion. You have to ask him, who's having this delusion?
Oh God, it's a glasses off moment. Okay, so you have this awful, I'm sorry, it's absolutely awful objection to illusionism, which is, well, if you're saying that phenomenal consciousness is an illusion, the only way for there to be an illusion is for you to be phenomenally conscious of the illusion in order for you to be experiencing it. No. I mean, first of all, it's so ridiculous to object to a position based on the name of the position. This has happened to me before when people say, well, moral realists think morality is real. And if you're an anti-realist, you think morality is not real. What the hell would it even mean to say morality is not real? But in this case, if you're an illusionist, illusionism is roughly the view that consciousness for people presents itself to people in a way that it isn't actually that way. It's not the way that people think that it is. That's all that it is. So in other words, you could say that it's the view that it seems to us that we're phenomenally conscious, but we are not phenomenally conscious. Nothing about that, the fact that we're not phenomenally conscious, even though it seems to us that we're phenomenally conscious, the sense in which it seems to us that we're phenomenally conscious does not implicitly presuppose that it seems that we are phenomenally conscious of the fact that it seems to us that we're phenomenally conscious. No person that came up with this view was such an idiot that they just were like, oh, well, we're phenomenally conscious of the fact that it seems to us that we're phenomenally conscious, but we're not phenomenally conscious. Why would they think that? Why would they say that? Why would that be the position? No, the position does not require that you be phenomenally conscious in order to be subject to an illusion. Illusionism offers a different conception of the nature of consciousness. And so that conception of the nature of consciousness, nothing about that conception of the nature of consciousness requires that we abandon talk of having experiences or things seeming to us to be a certain way, or to us having a particular kind of phenomenology or perceptions or thoughts or beliefs. You could go all in on some type of eliminativism, but even there, you're probably going to have some like backup or workaround way of referencing all these things. But in the case of illusionism, no, it has all of the verbal and philosophical resources to account for people appearing to people that they're phenomenally conscious in some way that doesn't require phenomenal consciousness, but it is not in fact that way. So among other things, you could just say people tend to verbally affirm the proposition that they have qualia, but they do not in fact have qualia. You could even put it in those terms. So yeah, it just doesn't require that. This objection that, illusionism doesn't make any sense because the only way you could be subject to an illusion is if you were conscious of the illusion. So we can't not be conscious. It's so silly. It's so silly. It's such a bad objection. Oh, it's really frustrating to see that for people. I don't know why they think that's such a good gotcha. It is not. It's really, really embarrassing.
And he's brilliant. The guy's smarter than me. That doesn't make him not gullible or unbiased. His atheism is leading to a series of other beliefs that's causing him to deny obvious facts of reality. More
causing him to deny obvious facts of reality. Oh boy.
Morals are real. Free
Real in what sense? What's the argument for that? Do you have any arguments for that? Are there any good reasons to think that's true? Of course, we're not going to get them.
will is real. Your consciousness is so real. How can you deny it?
Watch this. Here's how I can deny it. I deny it. Ooh, look, it's possible to deny it. It's very strange for people that have this sort of set of views, in which I'm denying all of these, that seem to think it's like super difficult to deny these views, that they're just so obvious. None of this is obvious to me. In fact, in many of these cases at this point, if it wasn't already, it's pretty obvious to me that they're not the case. To me, this is like just imagine I was up like here saying like, it's obvious that we could see auras. It's obvious that we have telepathy. It's obvious that we could sense, spiritual beings with our minds through the power of ghost sight. I don't know. Like people that have certain senses or feelings or thoughts or beliefs or attitudes, it might, from their point of view, it might seem like, how could it be otherwise? Do they not talk to enough people with different views? I don't operate under the presumption that the way that other people experience the world has got to be like me. And I'm just flabbergasted if people are like, no, I don't have mental imagery. No, I don't have an internal monologue. No, I don't know what that experience you described. Like, I have no problem just accepting at face value that those are possibilities on the table. And yet, people that hold the more robust metaphysical views, the belief in libertarian free will and God and continuity of identity in these more metaphysically robust ways, or people that believe in souls, people that believe in phenomenal states and moral realism, and whatever type of non-naturalist view you want on this or that issue. They operate using a methodology that seems to me to lend itself towards a profoundly navel-gazy perspective on human psychology, where it's difficult for them to fathom that we think differently. And the ironic thing is, I get such a hard time from people that have these views saying, well, maybe you're conceptually impoverished, maybe there's something wrong with the way that you're thinking. Okay, think about what's going on here. Person has like a certain kind of phenomenology. And then they think, well, I have this phenomenology. And some of the people that happen to be agreeable that I talk to, they have this phenomenology. Everyone has this phenomenology. In fact, my phenomenology directly tracks or accesses the truths of the deepest truths about the world. And so if you come along and you say, I don't experience it that way, to them, it's kind of like if you were denying like an obvious sound that you can like there's a bird chirping and they're like, can't you hear the bird chirping? No. Oh, well, then there's something wrong with your ears or your brain or whatever. Can't you see that tree over there? No. Okay, well, there's something wrong with your eyes. That's the kind of way that they're viewing this. Like they have these like extrasensory capacities. And so if you're not seeing intellectually what they're seeing, there's something wrong with you. Whereas from the way I'm looking at it, I have people that are making unsubstantiated claims about quasi-perceptual capacities to detect these mysterious truths that cannot be verified empirically, cannot be tested in any way. They can't demonstrate that they have these powers. They just double dog swear that they have these powers. And I'm supposed to grant that they have these powers, and there's something wrong with me if I don't do that. What the hell? What the hell is that? Why would I take that seriously? And so, people that do this, it's really important for them to be like, everybody thinks this way, or most people think this way, or all sane people think this way. It's to the point where if you deny some of these positions, they will suggest that you're a psychopath. Okay, I'll just show you one. Because some people might say, does anyone really say that moral anti-realists are psychopaths? I'll just show you one. Why not? We'll switch over to this. Oh, no, I don't want to show you that. Give me 1 second. I know how I can show you. I can show you a draft of a blog post. Where is it? Here it is. Got it. Okay, great. Where is it? Here. Okay, take a look at this tweet right here, where the person is saying, "I think they believe it." This is in reference to moral relativism. So maybe a higher percentage of people are psychopathic now. Definitely plausible. No, it's not plausible. Moral relativism has nothing to do with psychopathy, and yet I have seen people suggest that there's a blog post on Substack where the person said that yeah, people can't really be anti-realist because you have to be a psychopath to be an anti-realist. It's just ludicrous. Psychopathy is like characterized by a profound lack of empathy, poor impulse control, disinhibition. It's often associated with you know bold action, lack of concern for the welfare of others. It may be associated with manipulativeness. In some cases, basically people are less likely to hold back from doing the things. Their egocentrism, basically. Um, Nothing about not thinking it's the case that there are stance independent, irreducibly normative moral facts has anything to do with that. It's just denying like a weird abstract metaphysical thesis. Nothing about thinking that way has any entailments for how you treat other people or your capacity for empathy or how much you care about other people's welfare or your attitudes or your emotion. It has nothing to do with that. Suggesting that your philosophical position would only be available to you if you're a psychopath is ridiculous. It's beyond ridiculous. It's so strange. And people will also talk about like, oh, people stop believing in free will, then we just we'd have to let people out of prison and you would be able to punish people. Yeah, you can. I don't believe in free will. I'm in favor of punishing people. I'm in favor of putting people in prison for the right circumstances. I'm not a retributivist. I don't think you should punish people because they deserve punishment. But to the extent that certain types of like if you need to keep someone out of society because they're a serial killer, why would I be against that? You could be against. You could be in favor of various types of. You could be in favor of a functional and just criminal justice system. Not that anybody ever has one, but you could be in favor of one on prudential grounds. Entirely on for practical reasons. You don't have to think that the only sense in which and the only way we would be justified in punishing people is if they have some special capacity to think or act in a certain way. You just don't need that. I mean, I don't need it. If someone else needs it, maybe they need to reflect. But this suggestion that there's something wrong with us. Okay, step up and prove it. If you think that I am conceptually impoverished, there's something wrong with my brain, I'm totally happy to get involved in the empirical research for you to show that moral anti-realists and atheists and naturalists and free will skeptics and illusionists about consciousness show that we have brain lesions, show that there's something wrong with us. Because the people that say this are not going to do that. They wouldn't even know how to do it because most of them are these more rationalistically inclined philosophers that run screaming anytime anybody says, hey, maybe you should deal with this empirically. But they want to suggest they're going to engage in this ridiculous armchair speculation about our psychology when we're the ones saying, hey, maybe these empirical considerations from psychology should be more of a factor in how you approach philosophy. But they're just going to do all this. It's so much armchair psychology. Just sitting in an armchair. I'm sitting in an armchair. Sitting in a chair saying this is how people think. Like, and you'll see from these tweets, especially when I post the Twitter Tuesday for this on my Substack, they'll just say no one believes relativism, no one can live consistently with relativism, no one can be an anti-realist. They just psychologize like they have telepathy. It's ridiculous, and I'm so tired of it. And what's especially tiring about it is that anti-realists in the comments will say, okay, well, if they live in a contradictory, what are these contradictions? They get challenged. They often ignore. They condescend. They don't respond to the challenges. When they do respond, their answers are reliable, just suck. They get bad responses to anti-realists. So, but it's just, and a lot of times on Twitter, at least, it's the same figures, just with these trash arguments over and over and over and over. I've been on this channel now for what, over a couple of years now. I don't even remember. But it's just that it's fish in a barrel at this point. I'm half asleep. It's almost 11 at night. It's so low effort for me to deal with these terrible arguments against people with views like mine, people that are free will skeptics, people that deny free will, that deny phenomenal consciousness. It's just they're what almost all of this comes down to. Most of the philosophical arguments that they present are present. What it comes down to is they just think, well, it seems to me that to be that way, so it is that way. Everything else is post hoc rationalization. At least on my view, that's what I suspect. For the most part, I do think some philosophers have like really tried to present arguments for these views, but I think that they're not doing most of the heavy lifting. At most, they are a mild auxiliary feature to what ultimately is a pick your conclusion first style of philosophy. You start with your conclusion and then you recruit the reasons after. That is how many rationalistically inclined philosophers. This is why I have such a problem with the way that I think people use phenomenal conservatism in practice. So they'll say, well, it's a very modest principle. It seems to you that it's a certain thing. Then you have, some initial degree of justification for believing it is that way in the absence of defeaters. But then what they'll say is, and I just don't think the defeaters are good enough. So they set themselves up in this sort of a philosophical high chair where they are the final arbiter of any and all evidence against their view. And, so it's just, I'm justified unless you show otherwise. And, they could do exactly the thing that Christian apologists will sometimes say to atheists is, the atheist will just say, well, I'm not convinced by the argument. I'm not convinced by the argument. I'm not convinced by the argument. So people that believe in qualia or moral realism, if they rely on phenomenal conservatism, it puts them in a position where they could always put their thumb on the evidential scales and just say, whatever arbitrary amount of evidence you present, that's not enough. My seemings are too strong. So it might seem in practice, and it is on paper supposed to be a very modest principle, but in practice, it is an arbitrarily strong principle. It's basically like, people that rely on this in practice seem to functionally treat themselves as Dragon Ball Z characters that have whatever power level they feel like. Whatever they need to defeat you, they get to type it in, and that's how much power. That's their power level. So that's what it seems like to me when I talk to. Maybe there's some higher than saying that's what it seems like to me. And by the way, anyway, that's what it seems like to me when I talk to them. But by the way, I am trying to do this myself, is to actively say it seems that way to me. Is I try to say that because I'm constantly criticizing realists for saying it seems that, and philosophers in general, without specifying who it seems to. Okay, let's have a look at the comments and try to get through the rest of this Winger video. All right. Tyler says, I didn't get a stream notification from Discord this time. I definitely put one in there. Cloud of Time says, the empty bookcase is a shot at the people who have full bookcases in their backgrounds. I also do not have many physical books. Digital is better for note searching, highlighting, and transport. I agree. In fact, that right there is a, can I point it? Yeah, that right there is a pretty much empty bookshelf, so I could put it behind me. I really just need to rearrange. I don't know. I'm not going to do it now, but I got to rearrange the room to get a wall behind me and then set some stuff up there. And then get the mic arm going so I could actually have the mic in front of me and not sound so terrible. Okay, anyway. Flaming Hell says, why is everyone so bad at metaethics? Because learning a language sucks and objective seems like an emotionally important term. Of course, there's other reasons as well. Yeah, I agree about objective. I've largely, it's just too polysemous. It's too sloppy of a term. So you'll rarely see me say the term objective. I actively avoid it. I tend to use the term stance. A lot of times says, well, one sense of delusion can be taken as fairly synonymous with illusion. Its use of delusion here might be for exaggerative rhetoric to align with delusional. Yeah, I agree. There's no reason to use the term delusion. No good reason. Grant Miller says, isn't the same thing morality is objective? It's still contingent on you caring, I guess. Yeah. Other sign says, that said, though a brief search, I cannot find any quotes from Denny using the term delusion. It's rather delusion. Yeah, but he has a lot of papers. He could have said it somewhere. I don't know. Timothy says, hell yeah, Lance, get mad. I'm too tired to get that mad. That holy tirade was beautiful. Appreciate it. Thank you. Modern moralist says, question, are there dance independent values? There are not. All values ultimately depend on dances in some form or another. I'm not going to do those dances. That's someone else's task, but they are dependent on dances. All right. I just realized I wasn't even sharing the video anymore. I was about to click play and I'm like, wait, where's the video? Jeremy says, I love how these epistemically humble people know what someone who knew every physical fact relevant to color perception would be surprised by. Yeah, this is such a weird thing about thought experiments is that when you think about a lot of what is necessary for people to like for the thought experiment to do what they think that it can do, like the conceivability of this or that scenario or whatever. Like take a repugnant conclusion. If there was a world like this, if there was a world where there was a vastly more people, like I don't know, 10 trillion people or whatever, that all live lives barely worth living, that wouldn't be a good. I have no damn clue what that world would be like. I can't conceptualize that. But philosophers will, it's like they think that as long as they could say words, that they could simulate anything in their head. Yeah, take examples like this. Let's say Napoleon died when he was a baby. And so Napoleon never, had a, there was never a Napoleon, conquering most of Europe. Okay, so if Napoleon had not existed, or if Napoleon had no big effect on Europe, what would the differences in Europe be like today? Can you just simulate that in your head and just know what the differences would be? No, you can't. A historian specifically of the Napoleonic era wouldn't be able to do that. They can speculate, but they're not able to actually simulate that. And yet philosophers seem to think that they could just simulate really bizarre alternative worlds. And in the case of Napoleon, it wouldn't even be like a bizarre world. It would be a world like ours that just is historically a bit different. But philosophers will imagine radically different things and then think that they can then imagine how things would be different under those circumstances. It's I don't know what they think that they're doing in these cases, but I don't think that they're doing what they think that they're doing. It's just quite strange. All right. Let's go back to
Atheism made you deny it. Atheism got you to deny morality, got you to deny free will and consciousness, self even. It's a gullibility that's produced because of atheism.
Gullibility. It's gullibility. Why isn't it just correct? Why does he call it gullibility?
It's a rational outgrowth of denying something very, very true about God, and you have to deny things that are very true about reality other than God.
You have to. No, you don't have to.
Things that derive from God. Or you can acknowledge.
So Jack Easling says, your Napoleonic analogy doesn't work since it involves so many variables, whereas philosophical thought experiments usually involve one or two, stipulating a list of people. Yeah, I don't think that people can simulate a condition in which they change two things and hold all else equal. I don't think they can do that, at least much of the time. Can people conceive of philosophical zombies? I don't think that people have the psychological ability to do that. The Mary's room scenario is ridiculous. How the hell would they know what would happen? We're supposed to imagine a person that knows everything there is to know about color. What exactly does that entail? It's a completely unrealistic scenario that I don't think people have the capacity to fathom. So no, I don't buy that. I think it's a good analogy. If anything, I think we're getting. I think we could be even more critical of philosophers because the scenarios that they imagine don't map onto familiar sorts of experiences. They often involve counterfactual considerations that have never occurred and that they have no familiarity or experience with. They often involve changing some variables but not other variables under circumstances in which a person has no experience with manipulating those variables and holding them, some of them constant, some of them not constant. I don't buy that philosophers actually have the ability to imagine this.
Acknowledge those things as real. You say, well, I'm an atheist, but I believe in moral realism. And you're not playing games with the words objective and subjective. Let's be honest, a lot of people do. Sam Harris plays games with objective and subjective to dodge this issue. You try to figure out what he believes. Watch him talk about morality and be like, wait, well, what does he believe though? You probably won't even understand him, to be honest, because of these games he plays.
I gotta say, I do agree with that part. Right on.
But you can acknowledge them as real, but then you'll struggle with explaining how they don't point to God. And so
I don't think so. Look, I am about as unfriendly towards moral realism as anyone can get. Is there a single person that has as many videos and blog posts about how much they don't like moral realism than me in the world? But even I don't think that. I don't think anything about moral realism should lead us to suspect it's going to point towards God. I mean, first of all, a majority of philosophers that endorse moral realism are naturalist realists, so why would they think that? But then even if you're a non-naturalist realist, why would that point towards God? I don't think God changes the equation very much one way or another.
People often just end up rejecting them. Here's another example. Atheism makes you gullible. I do believe this is a truth, and I think it's helping atheists to tell you this, right? I'm being your friend by calling you out. This is the book of the God delusion.
We don't need to get into this. I've had enough of this particular video. It's going to go in another direction. And I don't even necessarily disagree that there's quite a lot of unconvincing and philosophically weak literature promoting atheism. Okay, so, and that's fine. So that wasn't too bad. I don't have a huge problem with a lot of the stuff that he said. I think it's like, the problem is, like, obviously I disagree with him because I endorse all of those views. So to the extent that he's like, atheism leads to these views, well, good if it does. But I think that the causal story that he has is pretty underdeveloped in his perspective. Okay, what else do we have? Oh man, do I really want to go through all of these? I don't know if I'm up for it. I already did an hour. All right, I guess I could do one more. I wanted to look at some blog posts, but I don't know if I really feel like going through those. Maybe I'll do that another time. Okay, let's see what other people say, and I'll show another video. All right, modern moralist, you're getting real silly in the comments, so I'm going to fully address those. Anyway, Jack, I know I was very critical of this remark here, but I do appreciate the comment, even if I think that we may not agree on it. So I do appreciate that. I like the pushback, like people disagree. Timothy says, you might have already answered this, but I dipped out for a bit. Did you see Malpass? No, I did not. What was the debate about? Can you tell me? I'll get the next video up here. All right. Does the universe have a cause? Huh, that could be interesting. Not really typically in my wheelhouse, but it might be worth having. Okay. I could go look that up. Okay, so this here is a debate between a moral anti-realist and a moral realist. And I don't know how useful the beginning of it is, so I think I want to get to the part about phenomenal conservatism. I don't remember where that was. Maybe I could, give me 1 second. I'm going to try to find it real quick. So I don't have us going through a whole bunch of the video that's like just laying out definitions and stuff that we might already do. Oh, there's not a transcript here. Give me a second. So. All right, good enough. A few minutes into it should be good enough. Timothy says, Malpass said bad audio, but it was interesting. Yeah, sometimes it's unfortunate when, you know, I was on a trip a few times and I really bad audio. It's pretty frustrating. All right, let's see what they have to say.
What's happening to farmed animals is just objectively wrong. It's not just a matter of opinion. And then maybe we can just kind of go from there and just get having some back and forth. So Connor, did you want to just say why you think things such as what's happening to animals or murder and theft and things like this, why is this just factually bad?
Let me know if the audio is an issue.
Yeah, so I guess I'll just start by like talking about my general approach to philosophy and how I go about justifying beliefs across all domains. I like a view that's called phenomenal conservatism. Are you guys familiar with it?
No.
Can I explain it? So basically, phenomenal conservatism just says if it seems to you that something is the case and you don't have a good reason to doubt that seeming, then you're justified in believing that things are as they appear. And the reason I think that is because, like, I don't like, what are the alternatives to think that things aren't as they appear, or to not have any beliefs? Like, at some point when you look at all your beliefs, you're going to say, okay, how do I know that How do I know that? And you've got to go all the way down to bedrock. And at some point, you're going to have to appeal to some premise where you're just like, it just seems to me that it's obvious that 1 + 1 = 2, and that the external world is real and things like this. Because if you don't,
there's a bunch of issues with stuff like it seems obvious that 1 + 1 = 2, and there's an external world. Because what matters when you make those sorts of claims is whether you're as a friend of mine put it. Well, I don't know if he wants me to use this terminology, so I'll avoid some of the terminology. But people will make a claim like it's obvious that 1 + 1 = 2. But some people are nominalist about mathematics. Some people are Platonist about mathematics. Different people have different underlying philosophical assumptions about what it means to think that 1 + 1 = 2. And some of the times when people will make these claims, it's obvious that X. They'll try to leverage that sort of just verbal assent to the claim into some broader claim that bakes in more robust presumptions about this or that particular philosophical position. And I take quite a bit of issue with that because the issue here is that what exactly is it that seems obvious? Is it you're assenting to some proposition, but does that mean that if you're assenting, you have to take on board all the philosophical assumptions that you or another person has in mind behind that particular position? No. So yeah, I agree that 1 + 1 = 2. Does that mean I'm a Platonist? No. I agree that there's an external world. Does that mean I endorse the truth of an external world in the sense that Connor does, or that a lot of analytic philosophers do? Probably not, because I'm a pragmatist and I have a different view about metaphysics and what it would mean for there to be an external world than they do. Like, among other things, I'm not a scientific theorist, so I don't think that the contents of our scientific theories are true the way that a scientific theorist does. So when things seem true to me, that doesn't mean that I get to bring on board all my philosophical views and then say, well, not only do they seem true in this sort of a theory neutral sense, but they seem true in this theory robust sense. So boom, I get to bring my whole theory on board. Like, you can do that, but other people that puts you in an awkward dialectical position, because other people that affirm those same claims are going to have a different perspective. And so there's something very weird about just saying, well, it seems to me that 1 + 1 = 2. Okay, but does it seem to you that that mathematical Platonism is true? So because okay, so if you're a realist, okay, it seems that certain things are wrong. Does it seem that they're stance independently wrong? How is that part of the seeming? How could that be part of the seeming? I have a huge problem with philosophers seeming to me to think that they could do more with their phenomenology than I think they could do. So, if I think about my moral attitudes about things, yeah, there's things I approve and disapprove of, but I don't think it's any part of my experience that the fact that, like, I don't even know what it would mean for it to be part of one's experience, that the sense in which I would be inclined to think that, like, torturing babies is wrong is stance independently wrong. How could that be part of the experience? Because my experiences they're percepts. They're like, I see things, I hear things, I smell things, I taste things. I don't experience my beliefs. Like, I have beliefs. I could tell you about my beliefs, but they don't have like a perceptual or quasi-perceptual phenomenology. And yet, like, how could it be part of an experience that something that stands independent? That seems like an inference that one makes about the experience, not a part of the experience. And so I have huge concerns with, I think people that are employing phenomenal conservatism are conflating the content of their experiences with their philosophical commitments. And they are mixing the two up and thinking that the philosophical beliefs or the inferences they're making about their experiences are a literal part of the experience. So, yeah, things might be the way that they seem to be to you, but I don't know what content is in the seeming. I don't think that the contents of our seemings, the contents of our percepts, or the contents of our phenomenology includes these, like, abstract philosophical positions, And if it doesn't include them, then what are they doing? Are they inferring these philosophical positions? Well, then it's not part of the phenomenology. So it's presumably it's one of those two, or it's some third thing. But there's something very weird when people make these sorts of claims, where I think that they do this thing where there is a sort of the ordinary discourse that we have. Yeah, if you go out and ask people, does 1 + 1 equal 2? They're going to be like, yeah. But that doesn't mean that those people endorse any particular philosophical position. So we're strongly inclined not to want to reject 1 + 1 equals 2 as a true claim. And people can then say, okay, well, if you don't, so it seems to you that 1 + 1 equals 2. So, it seems to you that the world is the way that I say that it is. And then they bring in the philosophical views. And it's like, well, no, like, I'm disposed to talk that way. There's certain sorts of things I could do with my commitment to that fact, but it doesn't carry to me any substantive philosophical import. Again, that's part of the experience. If I'm going to start philosophizing about my phenomenology, then I'm doing something other than appealing directly to the phenomenology.
Don't have a foundational epistemic theory, then you're just committed to saying that you don't know anything, and that sort of skepticism is the type of thing that I want to avoid, and it's also neither of our views. So that's how I go about approaching any debate. As far as morality is concerned, my starting point is realism, because when I think about moral questions, like if I ask myself this, if everyone in the world, if the Nazis won and everyone in the world approved of the Holocaust, would that in fact make the Holocaust good?
Are you serious? Are we getting the same thing as what Mike Winger said? Travis, I need your help. Shit, it's another take off the glasses moment. Oh my God. For fuck's sake, okay? An anti-realist can agree that if people all approved of the Holocaust, that it would still be wrong. I think it would still be wrong. I'm still an anti-realist. Why the hell did they think that? Jesus, fuck. Jesus, this is I'm sorry, this is bullshit. Your options aren't, okay, again, realists are setting it up like this. Okay, so I, as a realist, this is Elder Freeman, I think that even if everybody approved of the Holocaust, that the Holocaust would still be wrong. So yeah, that's why I'm a realist. Okay, so there is a pragmatic implication of that, that if you're an anti-realist, you don't think that you're committed to thinking that if everybody approved of the Holocaust, that the Holocaust would be morally good? That is not an entailment of anti-realism. Why would you set this up as a pragmatically implied false dichotomy that gives people in your audience the impression that anti-realists are a bunch of people that are not against the Holocaust? I'm sorry, that's not just philosophically ridiculous, it's kind of like morally fucked up. This is normative entanglement on steroids. I'm so sick of this. People implying that I'm a psychopath, that we're a bunch of people that are not against the Holocaust. Why do people have to pull out the rhetorical nukes every time they talk about anti-realism? And no one gives them pushback on it. No one is saying, hey, can you stop implying that anti-realists are okay with the Holocaust and that we're a bunch of psychopaths? We're not psychopaths. We're not okay with the Holocaust. And I think realists damn well know this. And it's so ridiculous for people to say this in front of an audience, to make it seem like if you're an anti-realist, you're some kind of Holocaust apologist. It's disgusting and it's repugnant, and I'm sick of it. This isn't just philosophically bad. This is morally wrong for people to do this. And I'm so tired of this normative entanglement stuff. If you haven't seen this, I've been at this for a couple years now. I have not received any even remotely decent pushback when I talk about normative entanglement. So let me go through normative entanglement again, so that people know what I'm talking about when I'm talking about this. I'm sorry, I'm actually pissed off about this because I'm so sick of this coming. Okay, here's a case of normative entanglement. Here's how it works. Okay, so let's say there's a realist and an anti-realist. So the realist says to the anti-realist, hey, anti-realist, do you think it's objectively wrong to commit a genocide? Just go with the honesty. So let's say you're an anti-realist. So the realist is asking you, do you think it's objectively wrong to commit a genocide? Now, if you're an anti-realist, it would be inconsistent with the anti-realist position to say yes, because that would indicate that you think it's objectively wrong. Well, if you're an anti-realist, you don't think anything is objectively or stance independently wrong. So the anti-realist is not in a position to say yes. And so since this is presented as a yes/no question, what's the other option? No. Now imagine the dialogue again. You think it's objectively wrong to commit a genocide? No. Now, when an audience hears that person saying no, what is an audience going to think? They might very well think that the anti-realist is not against genocide. In other words, the problem with this question is that it rolls up the metaethical question of whether they think that anything at all is stance independently right or wrong inside of a normative question. And so what that ends up doing is the person's position on the metaethical question is piggybacking on top of their position on a normative question in such a way that even though technically if they say no, that's consistent with having the normative moral view that committing a genocide is wrong, they're not able to easily express that by just saying no. So so the problem is that like you could actually draw a 2x2 matrix. So what would happen if a person, so you ask a person, is it stance independently wrong to commit a genocide? If they say yes, they're telling you two things at the same time. Yes, that they think that it stands independently wrong, and yes, that they think it's morally wrong. They're giving you a meta-ethical position. They're a realist because they think there's at least one stance independent moral fact. And they're sharing their normative moral standard, which is that they're against genocide. But if a person says no, that doesn't tell you a whole lot. So in other words, in that 2x2 matrix, if a person says yes, they automatically go in the top left box. It's yes to both questions. Yes to the normative question, yes to the meta-ethical question. If they say no, they could go in any one of the other three boxes. So they could think on the top right box, they could think that if they say no, they could think no because they do think that there are stance independent moral facts, but they don't think that committing genocide being wrong is one of those stance independent moral facts. So this would be a moral realist that does not think that it stands independently wrong to commit genocide. So, you know, for comparison, imagine if you asked a realist, do you think it stands independently wrong to punch babies in the face? Sorry, do you think it stands independently good to punch babies in the face? A moral realist is going to be like, no. Does that mean they're not a moral realist? Of course not, because they would still have realist views about other things. They just don't share the same normative moral standard. So you see how technically the question is asking a normative question and a meta-ethical question at the same time? Because a moral realist could in principle say no to, do you think it stands independently wrong to X? Saying no to that question does not mean you're an anti-realist. You could just be a realist that disagrees with the normative claim. So in that top right box, if you're a realist that disagrees with the normative claim, you could just say no. And so you're still a realist, you just disagree with it. You could also think that genocide is not wrong and that it's not stance independently wrong because there's no stance independent facts. So you could be an anti-realist that also has really disgusting normative moral views, in which case you'd be saying no to both the questions. I guess it's the bottom right box, right? It's no and no, right? So you have yes and yes, yes and no, no and no, and then you also have no and yes, which is where a lot of anti-realists, myself included, would fall when answering the question. So when I answer the question, it's no to the stance independence part, it's yes to the normative moral part. Yeah, I think genocide is morally wrong. I don't think it stands independently wrong, but I disapprove of it. I think it's repugnant. I think it's horrible. I hold a normative moral stance. It's very easy to parody these kinds of questions. Like if you say to somebody, do you think, let's say you say to someone, hey, what's your favorite food? And they're like pizza. And you say, oh, okay, so do you think pizza stands independently good? Stance independently tasty? What are they supposed to say to that if they don't think that there's stance independent gastronomic facts? They're gonna be like, no. You can be like, oh, so you don't like pizza? You just said you like pizza. You're contradicting yourself. So what realists will frequently do is they wrap up, they bundle their meta-ethical claims with normative claims to make it seem like, to pragmatically imply that a moral anti-realist in saying no has deplorable normative moral views. And this is really messed up. And that's part of what's going on here. This is another way of setting up and framing a type of implied normative entanglement. It's giving the impression that anti-realists are bereft of a way of having even remotely socially acceptable normative morals. This is not just a poor way of presenting the differences between realists and anti-realists. It's actually, it's like sabotaging us by making it seem like we're awful shitty people. And why do realists keep doing this? Because look, I've been pointing this out for a couple of years now. Connor's probably read or heard me talk about this multiple times, and yet just feels totally fine doing this anyway. imagine like this is, and you could do this in other philosophical domains too. You could always do the setup to a utilitarian. You could say to a utilitarian, "Hey, utilitarian, what if it turned out that torturing babies on the weekend maximized utility?" Well, you're committed to maximizing utility, so technically your position potentially commits you to torturing babies on the weekend. Look at utilitarians, potential baby torturers, oh, they're evil. You could do that. That's a ridiculous way of presenting, of critiquing utilitarians. Because a utilitarian could say, like, yeah, okay, technically in principle, they would be okay with baby torture if it maximized utility, but the utilitarian is just going to stress that that's an absurd thing. It's not going to maximize utility to torture babies. So often when people make these sorts of criticisms, it's like a political move. It's like, no, I heard you say, and you might be okay with torturing babies, and you're going after the person that is holding the view by implying that there's something morally suspicious about the person, by playing with the entailments of a position or hypothetical conditions. You could do this for other positions too. I could go around pushing this rhetorical move. Hey, realists, if it was a stance-independent moral fact that you had to torture babies for fun or that genocide is good, would you agree that it was a stance-independent moral fact that it was good? Well, trivially, they would have to agree with that. Now, they could say it's logically impossible. They could try to make moves like that. But I could say, okay, but is it an epistemic possibility that it's a stance-independent moral fact that torturing babies is actually wonderful if you need to do it all day? I don't see how to get around that unless they think they have infallible epistemic access to the moral facts. So many of them would be sort of logically obliged on most of the commitments many of them hold. Say, yeah, under those conditions, then it would in fact be stance-independently good to torture babies or commit genocide. I could go around saying that but what would that accomplish? I would say, okay, so realists, it sounds like you might be okay with torturing babies. And it's well, yeah, they might be under weird counterfactual conditions that none of us actually think are particularly plausible. So why would I bring that up? Other than to try to make it seem like the realist is like a shady, sketchy person. So realists are constantly doing this to anti-realists, making it seem like we're shady and sketchy, or just outright saying, outright suggesting that we're psychopaths. They do this so frequently, it's so ridiculous, and I'm so tired of it. And I'm so tired of it not being addressed and confronted. This is not cool. And I really think they should stop this. And I really think they should acknowledge the rhetorical aspects of what's going on when they make these sorts of things. And they could do whatever they want. I'm not going to tell people what to do, but I am going to keep criticizing them when they keep doing it. And look, the more they keep doing it, maybe they could win the PR war, but if enough of us start calling them out for it, it's going to be increasingly difficult for people to keep implying that we're a bunch of evil psychopaths. Right, there's a lot of comments, so let's have a look at these. Jeremy says this subjective badness, not factual badness. Yeah, that's another issue. If someone mentions it, I'll bring it up. The issue of people saying something's really wrong, truly or genuinely wrong. It's such an issue. So Timothy says, seems like obviousness is more rhetorical than anything. I don't think that people that employ phenomenal conservatism and other sorts of epistemic principles are using it for rhetorical purposes. I actually think that they believe what they're saying. I tend to take people at the word. So if someone says, hey, it seems true, so is true, unless you got a defeater, okay. Yeah, I think people think that way. Jeremy says, is he himself still around to evaluate Nazi world, or is he still able to imagine himself as an imaginer not existing with the imagining still happening? Yeah, so this is part of the problem with saying, if there was a world where everyone was okay with a genocide, would the genocide be good or bad? The problem is, whose standards is it being indexed to? Or is it being indexed to my standards in the actual world, not a version of me in the hypothetical world? Or is it being indexed to the people in the world? Because if you're some type of appraiser relativist, where you think that what it means to say that's morally wrong is to say something like, I disapprove of that action, something like that. Well, if you say to an appraiser relativist, suppose there was a version of you that approved of torturing babies, would that version of you think that it was morally permissible to torture babies? The answer for an appraiser relativist is yes. But what realists will try to do is leverage this to make it seem okay, so then you're a monster. But think about what the appraiser relativist is saying. The appraiser relativist position is that, like, when a person says something like it's okay to torture babies, what that person means is that they approve of torturing babies. So the question is a really trivial one. It's a question that amounts to this. Hey, if there was a version of you that thought it was okay to torture babies, would that version of you think it's okay to torture babies? Yes. So that has nothing to do with whether you currently think it's okay to torture babies. It has nothing to do with your values or attitudes. And so trying to suggest, so, realists will critique anti-realism by saying, well, it commits you to saying these absurd things, like it's okay to torture babies is true. Yeah, but if it's okay to torture babies is true only in the sense that when a person that makes that claim, what they mean is that they approve of it, and then we're stipulating that the person approves of it, then the appraiser relativist is committed to something completely trivial, which is that when people approve of things, they approve of things. What the hell is objectionable about that? Imagine in the appraiser relativist world, just nobody actually says this is wrong, this is right. They actually just get rid of that language and they substitute it for statements about what they approve or disapprove of. So now you have the appraiser relativist world. So if you're an appraiser relativist, you believe in a world in which people say they approve of things, that they approve of them, and they say they disapprove of things, that they disapprove of them. Yeah, don't you believe in that world? Like, don't you think if there was a world where people said if X, then X, if they think X, and that they think X, and they say X, so they think X, like what? How much more trivial could he make things? And yet they leverage the language, the Queen saying like it's okay to torture babies, and I approve of torturing babies, out of the mouth of some evil, clearly person we would consider like an evil monster. To make it seem like the person themselves is okay with torturing babies. So it's this like rhetorical move where they're distorting language to get a misleading impression about the moral standards of the anti-realist, rather than actually showing that there's anything wrong with the position. It's really, really weird. How do they not see that they're doing this? How do they not see that this is a silly rhetorical stuff? How do they not see it? I mean, if they do see it, then that's even worse. But if they don't, like, how are they not seeing this? And how many times do I have to go over this? And again, I don't get any good rebuttal. It's not like if a realist thinks I'm wrong about this, you can come up on the channel right now and argue with me. You could send me an email. You could post something in the comments. You tell me why I'm wrong. I'm happy. In fact, all of you, I will debate all of you. Any number of you that thinks that I'm wrong about this, I will debate all of you. In fact, I'll debate all of you at the same time, and you could pick the moderators. All of you. All of them. If it's 100 of you, I don't care. We can do one at a time, groups, I don't care. You can explain to me why I'm not right about this, if you think I'm not right about this. Watch, none of them are going to do it, because I am right about this. And they're going to keep playing these silly rhetorical games to keep implying that we're evil. And, look, why would someone need to keep implying that we're evil instead of actually showing what's wrong with our positions? Well, one reason might be that they don't actually have good objections to our positions. And so they have to rely on trying to make us out to be bad people. Is that the actual reason? I don't know. I'm actually genuinely not sure that that's the actual reason. I think that it might be that realists are just not thinking through the implications of anti-realist positions carefully. Okay. But more people in the comments. Wow, that's a lot. Yeah, here's another one. Well, Lance, is it actually morally wrong? Jerome says Charlie Kirk does this all the time. What exactly does Charlie Kirk do? Does he make this like really wrong thing? Sort of claim something else? Some pushback. Indian Z. I don't think Connor is doing this at all. I think he's making a point about stance independence. If he's making a point about stance independence, it's not a very good point, because an anti-realist can still say that they would think that what he's saying under those circumstances is wrong. Because whether or not an anti-realist thinks that, I mean, first of all, anti-realists do not have to think that they're stance-dependent formats. So this wouldn't carve up the conceptual distinction between realism and anti-realism adequately anyway. So again, there's a pragmatic implication. You say, well, I'm a realist, because, okay, let's look at example what he says.
Obviously, everyone in the world, my starting point is realism, because when I think about moral...
My starting point is realism because...
questions. Like
when I think about moral questions...
ask myself this. If everyone in the world if the Nazis won and everyone in the world approved of the Holocaust,
So what does he
think about moral questions. Like if I ask myself this, if everyone in the world, if the Nazis won and everyone in the world approved of the Holocaust,
I'm not catching what he's saying right before. He says that everyone in the world, and then he says something. If you could catch that, but you know what he's saying.
would that in fact make the Holocaust good?
Yeah, would that in fact make the Holocaust good? So he's talking about a very specific form of stance dependence. If you're an anti-realist, this does not commit you to the view that if everyone in the world thinks the Holocaust is good, that the Holocaust is good. It doesn't commit you to that. And it's, I mean, among other things, and there's several reasons why this is a bad way of setting things up. It's ambiguous. Am I one of the members of the people in this world? Is this supposed to be a characterization of an agent relativist account or an appraiser relativist account? And why say everyone in the world? What does what everyone else thinks have to do with anything if I'm an individual subjectivist, and whether or not I think whether or not an action is wrong depends on my standards? Why are you bringing up all these other people? It just doesn't disambiguate the agent and appraiser relativism. It doesn't disambiguate cultural and relativism and individual subjectivism. So it doesn't disambiguate any of the important disambiguation. It does not disambiguate any of the important distinctions you think between the relativist positions, and it gives the impression that if you're not a realist, then you're a relativist or something. And in this case, it even seems to, it could be interpreted as implying that if you're not a realist, you're specifically an agent cultural relativist that thinks that whether or not something is morally right or wrong depends on whether all or most or people approve of a particular action. I don't know any anti-realists that think that. So why would you give the impression I'm a realist because I don't hold this view? Imagine if I said I'm a realist because I'm not an agent cultural relativist. That doesn't make any damn sense. I'm not an agent cultural relativist. Doesn't mean I'm a realist. So this is a poor setup. It not only carries the rhetorical implications that anti-realists are okay with the Holocaust. It's just a very bad way of setting up the distinction between realism and anti-realism. Honestly, I would just say this is just very confused as a way of setting things up. So it's both rhetorically bad and just philosophically it has all kinds of problems. If you read him charitably, he seems to be saying the Holocaust is stance independent. You know what? Why should I read him charitably? Why should I do that? How charitable do I need to be when someone implies that people that take my philosophical position are psychopaths and approve of the Holocaust? That's not very charitable. No, I don't think I'm going to be charitable. In fact, I find that pretty objectionable for someone to say, like, do I always have to just bend over to have the most agreeable interpretation of what someone says when people on my side, at least me, have repeatedly pointed out the problems with them doing that? Why not pick something that's more morally innocuous? Why give the impression that anti-realists are okay with the Holocaust? And I have to treat that charitably? No. You know what? Fuck that. I'm not doing that. Yeah, and Yinzi again says, but read him charitably. No, I'm not going to read him charitably. No. You will no longer accuse him. I did not specifically say he thinks I'm a psychopath. And if you were in the stream earlier, you'll see that I showed a tweet of somebody suggesting that all relativists are psychopaths. And I was giving an example of one that I just came across today because I've seen this multiple times where people suggesting relativists or anti-realists are psychopaths. I didn't specifically say he suggested that. He's just, and again, he's not saying here, if you're an anti-realist, you're okay with the Holocaust. He's saying he's a realist because he doesn't think that if it were the case that everyone approved of the Holocaust would be good. That is a weird reason to say you're a realist because it doesn't distinguish realists from anti-realists because it's consistent with anti-realism to agree with them. So that's not a good way of, like, why would that be a reason to be a realist? Now, if he thinks, hey, it stands independently wrong, why not just say that? Why give a weak intuition pump that's a poor way of distinguishing realists from anti-realists? and it uses a super rhetorically charged example, and do so in a way that carries either like what does he intend the pragmatic implications? Well, in that case, that's a pretty bad thing to do. Does he not intend the pragmatic implications? Then he's not speaking carefully. So there's no excuse for the way that this scenario is set up. And he's using a very similar scenario that Matthew Adelstein uses from Vintage Newsletter. They keep using the scenario. I've raised a bunch of objections to it. I haven't heard any good rebuttal to the way that they set this scenario up. They just keep doing it. So I should be charitable? No, I'm not going to be charitable. There's a time and a place to be charitable, and this is not it.
Obviously, we'd believe it was good, but would it actually make it true that it was good? And when I reflect on that, it seems obvious the answer is no. Like, the Holocaust was terrible. It would still be bad. We would just be confused about that. So like, obviously, phenomenal conservatism leaves room for that seeming to be defeated. Maybe I'm confused.
Sorry,
maybe there's some explanation to be confused about. Like, it's true that it was good. And when I reflect on that, it seems obvious the answer is no. Like, the Holocaust was terrible. It would still be bad. We would just be confused about that.
Yeah, so I agree with him. I agree with him. Yep. When I reflect on it, nope, it'd still be bad even if everybody approved of it. Doesn't make me a realist. You see the problem? Not a good diagnostic tool for determining whether you're a realist, because an anti-realist can easily agree with that. In fact, do so. Travis, who's in the audience earlier, agrees.
So like, obviously, phenomenal conservatism leaves room for that seeming to be defeated. Maybe I'm confused. Maybe there's some explanation for that seeming that means that it should be undermined somehow. But that's my starting point. It just seems that some things are bad, independent of our views. And I haven't heard a defeater that I thought was compelling enough that I was willing to abandon that belief. So that,
you see, so it just seems to him that that's the way. He hasn't heard a convincing defeater. So you have a huge issue with this sort of claim because it's a completely private type of claim. It seems to me that something is true, and I'm justified in believing that things are the way they see it, unless someone presents good reasons to think otherwise. Okay, so let's say you're justified in believing that. Okay, why should anyone else believe it? I've given this analogy before, but suppose I was off in the woods, I ran into Bigfoot, I spent a whole week hanging out with Bigfoot. I would actually have pretty damn good reason to think Bigfoot's real. Like, I'm hanging out with Bigfoot. You know, let's say I hang out in Bigfoot's cave. Bigfoot's got a whole setup there, leeches off the power grid, it's got some solar panels or something. We play N64, we're playing some Mario Kart, you know, I'm hanging out with Bigfoot, we're having a good time. Like, okay, so now I know Bigfoot's real. Now, if I leave the woods a week later and I start telling people, hey, you know, I saw Bigfoot, Bigfoot's real, I'm justified in believing in Bigfoot unless someone could really prove like I was on drugs or something. Maybe they just can't prove that. Maybe I did see Bigfoot. Okay, but if I go around and make that argument, what does that argument demonstrate? Well, it demonstrates I am in a good position to believe Bigfoot exists. Okay, so maybe Connor's in a good position to think for real is true. Okay, but there's nothing public about that. It's not a reason for me to think that it's true. And at least it's a very weak reason. It's someone else's testimony. You know, it's like if someone says I saw a ghost. Maybe they have a good reason to believe in ghosts, but it's just because someone tells me they saw a ghost, it doesn't mean I have a particularly good reason to believe in ghosts. So this is a very from a dialectical perspective, it's completely inert. It doesn't achieve anything of note in an argument for why anyone else should endorse moral realism. So I don't know why people bring up phenomenal conservatism like it's like a good debate point to me. And also note what that does. If someone says, I have permission to believe, I'm justified in believing this. It's like they're granting themselves permission to believe it. I'm permitted to believe this unless you could show me why I'm wrong. Okay, well, if you're the final arbiter, it's like saying, I determine whether I am guilty, and I am the judge of this court, and it is your job as the prosecution to show me that I am guilty. But keep in mind, I am the judge and the jury and the executioner on that. I'm not going to bother arguing with that person because that person, like, it doesn't matter what evidence you present. They could always be like, not good enough. Reasonable doubt, not good enough. So I think that phenomenal conservatism sounds good as like a principle on paper, but in practice, when it interacts with human psychology, are humans going to be able to guarantee that the weight they give to their savings is epistemically appropriate and modest? I very much doubt it. So, I mean, this is just a recipe for amplifying one's motivated reasoning and to make oneself super stubborn and resistant to evidence to the contrary. Analytic philosophy. Why would you use that name? How dare you? When you react to Alex and Harriet's videos, I put the video suggestion in Discord. So I'm doing that with several other people. I think that's on October 12th. So it's next week, 1 week from now. Cool. Wow. Like losing track of time. So we'll be doing that in 1 week. I know it's like months and months and months before we got to it, but it was hard to get everybody's schedule. Yeah, Alex says, everyone accept him. These weird thought experiments should work even if he thought it was good. But then it sounds super confused. Why would he think that? Right. So is it like when someone says, if there's a world where everyone thinks such and such is okay, would it be okay? What does that even mean? Would it be okay relative to their standards or relative to my standards in this world? You would need to disambiguate that before it's even answerable. I mean, part of the problem with the way a lot of realists set up their thought experiments is that they don't even seem to adequately grok an anti-realist perspective on these questions, because for an anti-realist that thinks that evaluative claims and normative claims, like what's good or bad or right or wrong, need to have a clear index. The question like that is like effectively unanswerable unless you disambiguate what's being indexed. It's a bit like saying imagine there's a world where a bunch of people are standing in a particular direction, are they facing north or south? I don't know what. You'd have to tell me what direction they're facing. How the hell would I know that? Or imagine this world where everybody's facing north. What direction are you facing in this world? What does that have to do with what the people are doing in that world? So, like, you need to be clear on what you're indexing. Imagine there's a world where you were not named Lance. What is your name? Which me are you talking about? This me or that me? Because my name is Lance, but that Lance is not Lance. They're not named Lance, whoever that is. That me is not Lance. So if someone says, if they're, because it's weird, right? There's a version of you in another world that is not named Lance. What is your name? When you say your, are you referring to me or are you referring to that person? You'd have to disambiguate that for me to say whether the person would be Lance or not. And it's the same thing with moral perspectives. If you say there's a world in which people approve of something, is the thing good? Well, do you mean good relative to my standards or to those people's standards? And even if I said, well, it would be good relative to their standards, that could sound like I'm approving the action. It doesn't entail that I'm approving the action. Because if you're an evaluative relative, appraiser relativist, so if you're an appraiser relativist, you think, okay, well, whether an action is right or wrong depends on the standards of the person appraising the action. So you have a world of people that think the Holocaust was good. And then you ask, okay, well, would it be good? That question is nonsense for an appraiser relativist. So would it be good relative to the standards of the people in that world, or would it be good relative to my standards? If you say, would it be good relative to my standards, the answer doesn't change. I would say, no, it's not good. And so I give exactly the same answer as the realist. So the anti-realist appraiser relativist, if you disambiguate the question, gives exactly the same answer as the realist. If you say, well, relative to their standards, then the answer is technically yes. But like, so do you then say, okay, so as a appraiser relativist, you think the Holocaust is good? No, it doesn't follow. You think that the people in that world think that it's good. And so they say, so you think when they say the Holocaust was good, that proposition is true. So you're saying the Holocaust, it's true that the Holocaust is good. That's super misleading, because keep in mind what the appraiser relativist is committed to. They're committed to the semantic thesis that when that person says the Holocaust is good, what that person is saying is that they approve of the Holocaust. And again, as I said before, it's trivially true that if the Holocaust is good just means that the person saying that approves of the Holocaust and the person approves of the Holocaust, then that is just trivially true. You're just saying a person that approves of the Holocaust approves of the Holocaust. What the hell? Of course they do. That has nothing to do with whether you approve. So they're leveraging ambiguity about what these sentences mean and our semantic analysis of these sentences to give the impression that the anti-realist holds these deplorable views without coming out and saying it. Now, I don't know why they're doing this. Are they doing this because they think that anti-realists are like, what's objectionable about that? Well, I don't know what is supposed to be objectionable about saying that people that have bad views have bad views. Why is that a problem? Because, but then they would say that the sentence is true. Yeah, if you take the sentence out of the context in which the anti-realist is using it, it can kind of sound like the anti-realist is okay with something bad, but it doesn't mean that the anti-realist is okay with something bad. For comparison, imagine a world where everybody likes putting rotting garbage on their pizza. Would the people in that world like rotting garbage on their pizza? Yes. So imagine implying, so you think it's okay to eat rotting garbage, and you think it's good to eat rotting garbage on pizza? Well, it's good according to those people. Doesn't mean it's good according to me. So imagine implying that I think it's tasty to eat garbage on pizza just because I'm committed to the view that if a person says that they think garbage on pizza is good, that what they mean is that they approve of eating garbage on pizza, or they like eating garbage on pizza. Therefore, somehow I like it. That just doesn't follow. It just doesn't follow. And the same exact thing applies for morality. So this type of thought experiment is bad as a means of handling relativism. It's double bad for adding this like rhetorical normative entanglement aspect to it. And it's triple bad for being a really poor way of distinguishing realists from anti-realists. So I mean, just every kind of bad.
That's why I'm a moral realist.
Yeah, I have some potential pushback on that, but I think Pat might have something a bit more competent than what I might be about to say. Pat, just before you start talking, would you be able to put some earphones in potentially if you got some? Because I think when I talk or when Connor talks, there's sound coming from your screen.
I have a microphone, so if I put earphones on, doesn't that mess with the microphone? Because I'm using one.
All the earphones will do is it will stop. It's just that when me or Connor speak, we can hear our voice echoing, I think, from your microphone. It's like your microphone is picking up the laptop.
Can you just mute me when someone else is talking?
All right, we'll do that. That's fine. Yeah, Pat, do you have any pushback to what Connor was just saying there about say everyone believed that the Holocaust was good? Connor would say it would still just be objectively bad, regardless.
Just keep in mind there's multiple points of ambiguity. When they say everyone, who do they mean? Do they mean everyone in the hypothetical world, but not everyone in the non-hypothetical world? Do they mean everyone, including a version of you in the hypothetical world? And if so, are they asking whether the you in the hypothetical world would approve of it, or whether the you in the actual non-hypothetical world would approve of it? Or are they not including you in the world? Like there's just so many problems with this setup. It's ambiguous in numerous ways, and it's underdeveloped.
Of what people were saying.
Sorry, just to clarify, I'm not just asserting that it's bad. I'm saying I believe that it's bad because it seems to me that it's bad, and I don't have a adequate defeater for that seeming. So like that's how I go about justifying that belief. I'm not just going moral realism is true. Like that wouldn't even really be an argument.
Being bad is not really an argument either. Like you're sort of begging the question, you're sort of presenting a conclusion without giving the argument. So I don't know why I would believe in moral realism just because you think Nazis are bad, which is kind of the argument I'm getting from what you said.
Well, okay, I'd be interested to know how you go about justifying any of your beliefs. Because it's not begging the question, because begging the question is when you include your conclusion in one of your premises. But my conclusion is moral realism is true, and my premise is that it seems that it's true, but those are two distinct things. And I'm saying seemings are a source of justification.
It seems like very close to begging the question. But yeah, I would explain my view on anti-realism as I think people's values are based on their preferences. And when I say something is wrong or bad, I mean it's wrong or bad on my own preferences. And I don't think like this need for like a comfortable view on morality to make us like psychologically more comfortable that something's objectively morally wrong is a proper argument for moral realism. Like just because I think factory farming is disgusting and I'm morally against it myself, that doesn't mean like I automatically would say that there's a universal standard, universal objective morality. But I'm still like a bit confused about the Nazi thing. Like, can you just break it down a little bit more? Why?
So I don't really agree with what she's saying about this being like question making. I mean, it'd be pretty straightforward to have some sort of like, I mean, technically, I think like every deductive argument is question begging. But it's not question begging in the obviously really awful way where you're like, moral realism is true. If moral realism is true, then moral realism is true. Therefore, moral realism is true. You could do something really silly like that. But this is more something like if it seems to me that moral realism is true, then I am justified in believing that moral realism is true. It seems to me that moral realism is true, therefore I am justified in believing moral realism is true. So it's pretty trivial to have like a non-obvious, it's like a not a problematic question begging argument for realism, or at least a justification for believing that realism is true. On Connor's view here, I don't see a problem of question making here. I'm not sure why she thinks that. The issue I would emphasize though is that the kind of argument that Connor would be presenting at best only is able to lead to a conclusion, not to like moral realism is true, but like I am justified in believing that moral realism is true, something like that. What it's not going to do, I mean, you could frame it in a way where the conclusion is something like moral realism is true, but it wouldn't be the premises are still going to be like highly contingent. Like if it seems to you, like you could like if it seems to you that moral realism is true, then in the absence of defeaters, you're justified in believing that moral realism is true. It seems to you that moral realism is true, therefore you're justified in believing that moral realism is true in the absence of defeaters, something like that. But then a person reading that could just go, okay, but it doesn't seem that way to me. So they could, I mean, they could just reject phenomenal conservatism and reject the first premise. But for someone like myself, I would just say, okay, well, I don't accept the second premise. I don't care about the first premise. It doesn't seem to me it's true. So now what? So I mean, this is a pretty straightforward reaction to someone in Connor's position, where he could say, well, it seems to me that it's true, so I'm justified in believing it's true. Okay, well, it seems to me that it's not true, so I'm justified in believing it's not true in the absence of defeaters, and I don't think realists have presented adequate defeaters of anti-realists. So, and I actually do think that. That's like, I'm not just saying that performatively. And so that puts us in an immediate dialectical impasse. We're in exactly symmetrical positions. This is dialectically inert. It doesn't do anything to advance the case for realism. Yeah, it just doesn't do anything. I'm just having a look at the comments. Yeah, so Alex says, but does it seem to be stance independently true to Connor? Yeah, note that he doesn't say stance independently true, and that might be implicit there. But I really would like to hear from someone that thinks that things seem stance independently true. What the hell? How does something seem stance independently true? Like, okay, let's say it seems to me that 2 + 2 = 4. Can it seem to me that 2 + 2 equals, it's that platonically 2 + 2 = 4? Do I have some sort of direct experience of the platonic objects that the numbers correspond to? Is that a part of the experience? Can it be a part of the experience? Well, that would be a pretty weird thing to say. So how do we get from it seems to me that X is bad to X is stance independently bad and justified in believing it's stance independently bad? I think it's got to be part of the seeming that it seems to me that this would be bad, and it seems to me that it wouldn't depend on people's attitudes or preferences or values. I guess maybe that's what they would say. I think I've heard people say stuff. Can like a counterfactual seem to you to be true? How do you experience a counterfactual? It seems to me this would be true even if people did think otherwise. Like, how are counterfactuals part of our phenomenology? I don't think so. That seems like nonsense to me. It's really weird. I think that there's something really fishy going on with the supposed phenomenology that realists seem to be reporting. I'd love to talk to a realist that would dive into their phenomenology, but a lot of them are just not going to want to talk to me, especially when I'm dropping F-bombs on here, right? Get a little worked up. Right.
By like just what exactly you mean by that?
So like I reflect on whether or not on the moral properties of the Holocaust in a scenario where everyone approves of it, and it strikes me that it would still be bad.
This is so weird. So I reflect on it in a scenario where everyone approves of it, and yeah, I still think it's bad too. Still not a realist, so I don't understand what he's doing here.
See, I sense that we're a bit suspicious of this way of going about justifying beliefs. But to be clear, like there are other things that I think we can all take for granted that I can't really explain how I know. So like, how do I know that there are no true contradictions? Well, I think about the nature of contradictions and the nature of truth. And
oh God, he sounds exactly like. He sounds so much like Mike Humor. Well, I just think about it. Yeah, I don't think that people figure out these things are true because they just think about it. I think people are taught like logical rules and axioms. They learn about them. They may reaffirm that they're true by thinking, well, yeah, it still seems true. But I see the like rules of logic as learned commitments that we use in particular philosophical and other contexts, maybe in some practical contexts. They do the job we need them to do, so we keep affirming them. If they didn't do the job, we'd stop affirming them. These to me, it seems like someone applying rules to the world and getting feedback from the world and it working out for them. So I just take a pragmatic view of logic and math as well. And nothing, I don't think that I'm experiencing anything radically different from someone that thinks that there are like deep metaphysical or conceptual truths or some synthetic a priori truths about these sorts of things. I don't see any reason to think that their experiences are substantially different from mine. And so, I think that they are overreaching when they make all these claims about the underlying metaphysics, all these facts about the world. I don't think you need any of that to navigate the world employing logic and math. So all just strikes me as very unnecessary and extravagant.
And it just seems obvious that there are no true contradictions. So, like, I think we have a rational capacity to understand some non-natural facts.
I don't.
Yeah. So he thinks we have a rational capacity to understand some of these non-natural facts. Okay. Cool. That's an interesting thing. So I'd like to know what is the rational fact? Is it mediated by any particular cognitive processes? If so, what are those processes? Do they figure into contemporary models of cognitive science? Like if I look at in some like embodied cognition model, is it going to say like, here's the system for color perception and here's some, like, not that they're localized to specific brain regions, but we've got all these cognitive processes in there. We understand like working memory and long-term memory and these different processes. Here's like a rational fact. Are we going to find that in those models? I can already tell you, I think the answer is going to be no. That at no point in our understanding of human brains, what they do and how they work, and how the human nervous system and body, because we're not just a brain. The whole nervous system works together. And I'm very much not a proponent of thinking that the brain is this like autonomous, isolated thing that's operating a puppet. The puppet's part of the system. So in any case, don't need to get into that too much. But at any point in constructing an adequate model of what we're doing and how we're doing it, what cognitive processes are involved, are we ever going to posit these like a prioristic rational faculties that give us access to a priori facts? I think the answer is no. It's a firm no. We're never going to need to posit that because the kinds of truths that rationalists think that there are, I don't think those truths exist at all. And I think that we could get by absolutely fine without them. And I think we'll never need them. And they are the intellectual ether of analytic philosophy. And you could drop them and there is no cost to doing so because they have no predictive value, they have no practical value, they don't do anything. They are the fancy of people living in a non-empirical fantasy land.
I don't disagree with anything you're saying, but your moral reasoning is based on your mind. So
yeah, Connor.
Yeah, obviously, I need a mind to form a belief. Obviously,
your moral reasoning is based on your mind. I'm not sure where she's going.
This is like why.
Yeah. So if you don't have a source other than your mind, I don't understand how you're a moral realist.
Well,
yeah. Well, of course, the epistemic tool that you're like the tool that's facilitating the epistemic commitments that you have is going to be your mind. That's not going to be a problem for a realist. Just because you're using your mind to make judgments about things wouldn't mean that you're somehow unable to be a realist. It's possible that she's suggesting that if you use your mind, then your beliefs are like mind dependent rather than mind independent, and so you can't be a realist because if you're using your mind to draw conclusions about moral considerations, then the facts are mind dependent. But that wouldn't be the case. That would be conflating different senses of the way in which things would be. My understanding independent of other senses. So the stance independence dichotomy in the realism, anti-realism dispute in metaethics has to do with what it is that makes the claims in question true. If you're a moral realist, that you think that the moral claims are not made true by your stances. If you're a moral anti-realist, then you don't think it's the case that there's facts about what's morally right or wrong that are not made true by your stances. That doesn't mean you think there's moral facts that are made true by your stances. You could just think there's neither kind of moral fact. But if a moral fact was made true by your stances, what it would mean is something like your attitude, your preference, your value, the fact that you have a particular moral stance, that makes it true. But what it does not mean is that if you use your mind, if your mind is required for you to form a belief or to present an argument or to employ some epistemic procedure, that because the mind is sort of like, you could say, like metaphysically necessary or required or needed in some other sense. Like, in other words, you can't have a belief if you don't have like a medium or a substrate that can produce the belief. So if there's some sense in which your beliefs need your mind, in that sense, it's not your mind that's making it true. So, I need my eyes to see trees, but that doesn't mean that whether trees exist, and my eyes are like a visual process, it's all part of my mind. It doesn't mean whether trees exist is like we have to be like anti-realists about trees because the existence of trees is mind dependent because you can't notice trees unless you can see them with your eyes or something. So like just because my beliefs about trees require me to have a mind, it doesn't mean whether or not there are trees requires me to have a mind. And a realist could just make the same point. Whether or not there's moral facts doesn't require, like the fact that we need to use our minds to form those beliefs doesn't mean that whether the beliefs are true is made true by our minds. There's something off about what you're saying, but at least it seems like it's.
Right. Here's one thing I think I mentioned to you, Pat, when we discussed this, right? Is the answer to 1 + 1 objectively 2, or is it subjectively 2?
By mathematical standards, it would be objectively 2, but then I said that there was a difference.
I'm not sure what's added by saying by mathematical standards is objectively true. What is the first part of that added?
Between descriptive statements and normative statements.
Yeah, explain kind of why. Okay. If that would be objectively true by mathematical standards, why is it not objectively true by moral standards that the Holocaust was bad? Why?
That's a strange question. Because what if I said, okay, well, if you think there are stance-independent truths about like chemistry, why do you not think that there's stance-independent truths about what food is good or bad? Like it's almost like there's an implied symmetry or analogy between the two domains. The person could just say, I don't think there's. Why would I have to give a reason why I think one and not the other? Like why would I treat them as presumptively of the same kind with respect to this distinction unless I could provide like a specifically articulate a reason not to? And a person they could just say, well, in the case of chemistry, I think that the facts about the contents of the periodic table correspond, like I wouldn't think this, but correspond to the like truths about that don't depend on our attitudes or values about like the chemical composition of like the elements in the world, like they have, I guess you could say the atomic composition, like how many electrons, neutrons, protons like that. And I don't think those facts depend on our attitudes or preferences, but I do think claims about like what's like you could make semantic claims, I guess. So that'd be an easy way to do it. You could just say, okay, well, I think when people say carbon atoms have 6 protons, that whether or not that claim is true or not is made true by what the world is like. It's not made true by our attitudes or preferences. But when a person says this pizza is delicious, that is made true by the person's attitudes about pizza. So there, boom. So you could do this, and I guess you could do it in this case. You could just say, yeah, when a person makes a mathematical claim like 2 + 2 = 4, what it is that makes that claim true are the mathematical facts, not the person's attitudes or preferences. But when a person makes a moral claim and expresses their preferences, so what it is that makes the claim true is whether or not their preference accords with the claim being made. So if they prefer that people not murder and they say murder is wrong, and murder is wrong means I prefer that you not murder, then the fact that they prefer that the person not murder makes it the case, the fact that they prefer people not murder makes it true that they prefer that people not murder. Like that's, so you could give an account. I guess I just did give an account. So that, I guess, is what you could say in response to this. I mean, it's a pretty weird, I don't like these semantic ways of approaching that could do that. Right. So let's see what happens here. I'm going to go grab another drink.
Why is 1 + 1 objectively 2 in mathematical standards, but then the Holocaust is not objectively bad?
In the same way, like I know my car is parked outside. There's no one on earth that would come here and see that and think differently unless they had some kind of disease that made their brain map onto the world differently from everybody else's. Whereas with something like the Holocaust is bad, there's a moral element to it. And how you justify that moral element relies on your preferences and how you view it. When Hitler looks at it, he thinks it's good, which shows you
but
that
why?
is universal.
Because he lacks empathy, so that's a defect of his brain. In the same way that the person is saying your car is not parked outside, Hitler is not capable of making the rational decision because he was ultimately born with, it must have been like a smaller amygdala or something than other people, which is the part of your brain responsible for processing empathy. He had the inability to put himself in the shoes of all those Jews that he gassed to death. He wasn't able to. So he was essentially born with what we could call a cognitive impairment. I think people with empathy can call people who just watch, I don't know, animal slaughter footage and stuff like that. I think we have within our right to say that those people are cognitively impaired and that they're poor judges of, in the same way, let's say someone was born with a defect that meant they couldn't judge depth perception correctly. So they might think that the space between this desk here and this wall is very large or something. And if they were to jump across it, they might die. But that would just be objectively wrong because they've got the depth perception part of their brain isn't working properly. Can we not just say the same thing about empathy, which is what's needed to make moral judgments?
Well, but we have rigorous scientific standards.
It seems like okay, so if my eyes track facts about the visual facts about the world, like I could figure out things using visual perception, hearing, taste, and then like what is empathy supposed to be a perceptual faculty that detects moral facts? Is that the implied comparison? Because that's real weird. Why would I think that empathy is like truth tracking facts out in the world? That's very strange. Like, why would I grant an analogy that empathy is functioning in this quasi-perceptual capacity where it's some sort of truth tracking system? So and there's other problems with this. So, have a look at Paul Bloom's book Against Empathy, where he says like, look, empathy functions like a spotlight. If a person has very strong empathy, they will sometimes focus on a narrow group of people rather than focusing on statistical information about people. So, let's say it's a question of whether you should make a utilitarian decision in a particular case, whether it would be okay to allow a few people to die to save like thousands of people. A person that has less empathy might actually be more capable of making that decision. We might all collectively agree that there's circumstances where that's the morally correct decision. So if that's the case, then empathy is actually impairing our ability to make the decision that on reflection we think is probably best. Because empathy is not just like smoothly tracking exactly what we think the on reflection, even our own moral standards of work. Empathy can override what we think is moral. Why would we think that this is some sort of truth tracking system? Empathy. That's very strange. There's other problems with this. Like just in terms of like how empathy actually functions, this would be very implausible. And then just on other sort of philosophical grounds, and I just see no particularly good reason to think that empathy is a good truth tracking quasi-perceptual analog to vision or hearing.
Standards and testing of things like gravity and things that then claims that scientists make, we don't have quite the same method of testing in morality. We only have moral philosophy.
Well, but what I'm saying is there could exist a method of testing this. And I think I mentioned this to you last time we spoke as well. The method of testing this was, let's say we had a group of people in the room who there was 4 people who knew all possible outcomes of a situation, and they had very high empathy. And there was 4 other people who knew all possible outcomes of the situation, but they had very low empathy. The part of their brain, the amygdala or whatever it is, was smaller than those others. The ones with the high empathy would just universally reach the same conclusion that murder is wrong, or that murdering animals or farming them or whatever is wrong, because they know all possible
This is so strange. Why would we think that people with high empathy would all converge on reaching the same conclusions? And even if they did all converge on the same conclusion, why would we think that that's an indication that what they converged on is true or like stands independently true? There could be some psychological system that we could point to that if it's functioning in everybody, they're all going to reliably converge on having similar food preferences or some other or attitude or preference or disposition or belief or whatever. But you would need some independent reason to think that convergence is convergence on truth and not just convergence on like some kind of adaptive behavior or something like that. But why think that empathy is a truth tracking faculty? I don't see any. He's not. This just seems very strange. This is real weird. I haven't heard someone propose something quite this crude in terms of a sort of a like moral perceptual approach. Normally I don't know, but this doesn't sound even remotely convincing to me.
All the possible outcomes of any given situation, and we can actually measure in their brain physically, scientifically, that they're able to emphasize, and the part of their brain that's able to empathize with the victim in any scenario.
Oh, I mean, like we can measure the regions in the brain. Okay, well, we could in principle measure parts of the brain associated with people's food preferences. Just because something's measurable doesn't have anything to do with whether it's tracking stance independent truths. Why would that be the case? And this is going to get especially weird if we're talking about non-naturalism, but even in these cases, just because you can point to, like, just because you can measure or detect parts of the brain doing a particular thing when a person thinks a particular thing, doesn't mean that the thing that they think is like tracking some special set of truths. This is all kinds of weird. All right.
Is saying that this is wrong. Why would that not be a rigorous way of just testing that they were right about
that could be a rigorous way of showing one group of people is more empathetic than the other, but your value of therefore these people are better, or this is my morally preferred way of being, which is to be more empathetic and to be good to animals, that is a subjective element, because what else would you be appealing to apart from your own minds? And there'll be people that disagree with you and say, actually, I think it's good to be cruel to animals. So
yeah,
what authority
and
there?
those people lack empathy, so they're not a good judge. It's like a blind person saying, I can see this in front of me, when they can't. As someone who's morally blind.
What's that based on? You're just saying empathy is good because it's good.
A physical property, a part of their brain. So it's a fully physical thing, biological thing.
Yeah, so that's a descriptive statement, but your normative claim that therefore people with bigger empathy portions in their brain are better, or this is a better way to be, that's the subject.
Yeah, so she's pushing a normative approach here that like the only okay, so let's say some people have functioning empathic systems and other people don't have functioning empathic systems, and then he's saying, okay, well, it looks like the people with the functioning empathic systems have the right normative moral beliefs, and so we're going to say that those people are able to detect the moral truths and the other people don't. But that's that's presuming that the contents of the people with the empathic normative moral views have like the right ones and the people without the empathic system don't. And you wouldn't be entitled to that because you're already imposing a normative moral valuation on which set of cognitive systems is tracking truth. The people that have the functioning empathic system or the people that don't. Because it could be that the empathic system is actually systematically biased, like at least in principle, is systematically biasing people and is causing them to form false beliefs. Like it's almost like if you had a hallucination gland that was in someone's brain. It's like, okay, well, people without the hallucination gland are actually tracking reality better than people that have it. So that does seem like a legitimate concern here, which is that if we're sort of retroactively determining which people are tracking the moral truths on the basis of whether the contents of their normative moral beliefs accord with our normative moral beliefs, then we're reasoning backwards from, it's like saying, okay, well, anybody that agrees with my food preferences is tracking the gastronomic facts. If you don't agree with my food preferences, you're not tracking them. That'd be a pretty silly way to go about doing things. So this seems like a viable route to raising a concern like this. But there's going to be like a plethora of other concerns that one might have with this account. Problems with using empathy as a guide that's not actually going to deliver the normative content that we would want it to deliver. What else? Like these metaphors or analogies to perception are really strained. So like, for instance, in the case of perception, In the case of perception, why do I think that visual perception can deliver knowledge of facts about what the world is like? Well, we have well-developed, not a complete, but a reasonably well-developed understanding of what's going on with vision. So that like light is refracting off of objects of the world. It's entering our eyes. We have this organ. The organ, there's like optic nerves. They go to the occipital lobe. There's all this processing. We can test various parts of that and see how it all operates. And so there's a whole system in place that is mediated through a series of physiological events that can allow us to account for what features or facts about what the world is like, independent of our minds, are being picked up on, processed, and understood by certain specific regions of our brain and the functions that those regions perform. So we have this whole account of how vision works. And we can do the same for olfaction and hearing and taste and touch. If you throw some of those senses in there too. So then if someone wants to propose that empathy is functioning in a perceptual capacity, okay, well, in all of those other cases, we could talk about the dynamic physiological interaction between the sense organs, the world, and the nervous system. So the world presents various types of stimuli. The sense organs actually have physical receptors that pick up on that stimuli. They transduce that information in the brain, and then the nervous system and the nervous system processes that information. Okay, so what physiological features of the world are the empathic regions of our brain picking up on? What organ is being used that's sensitive to these stimuli? So there's no stimuli. There's no organ that's responsive to the stimuli. Again, somehow this is like perception. This is a silly metaphor, a silly analogy. Like what? Is it extrasensory? Is it like antenna? Is it like telepathy? Is it magic? Because people will say, "Oh, you're straw manning realists," because they talk about magic. Well, when you say you have faculties that detect truths, okay, we have faculties for smelling and seeing and hearing and tasting. You could cut a brain open and point to parts of the brain that are associated with those faculties. That's a damn faculty. You could have faculties in a phone. You could have faculties in a microphone. You could pull out the parts, the wires. You could talk about how they work. You could reverse engineer them. Do you want to reverse engineer determining what the moral truths are? Okay, which cognitive systems are involved? What processes are involved? How do they work? We don't have any of that. We don't have anything even approaching the story of the cognitive processes involved in detecting moral truths. And this applies to philosophical truths more generally. So these faculties are look, if they're supposed to be empirical claims about human cognition, they are outrageously underdeveloped. If they're not supposed to be features of human cognition, what the hell are they talking about? So we have a rational faculty. We think and we figure things out. Well, thinking is a psychological process. So if you say that you could think in certain ways, what are the ways that you're thinking? What are the processes involved? What cognitive systems in the brain are mediating those processes? How do they work? I don't think that people that talk about these rational faculties that are anti-empiricists are going to have good answers to these questions, if they have answers at all. You might even insist that these faculties are not subject to empirical evaluation. If they insisted that, that'd be real weird. So they have a special way of thinking that's not empirical? I'm sorry, that would be nonsense. So if it is empirical, okay, then how does it work? It's one or the other. If someone said, "Hey, I just always know what time it is. Whenever you ask me what time it is, I just know what time it is." Okay, well, if they're going to say, "Well, I know what time it is," and that feature of my thinking, like I know and I think about what time it is, I experience the time, and then I report the time. Imagine a person saying that's not mediated by specific cognitive processes in their nervous system. I wouldn't believe that. That sounds very outrageous. If they said it is facilitated by some cognitive process, then I could then ask, okay, well, which ones and how do they work? How is your brain picking up on what time it is and telling us what time it is? How is it doing that? What is the mechanism? So on the one hand, if they're going to say it's not empirical, that'd be absurd. If it is empirical, how does it work? Show me how it works. So I don't really know what's going on with these analogies to these like truth tracking systems, but I think it's a catch-22. And I got a big old mug of beer here. So now not only is it late, it's after midnight for me. I'm having a drink too. Why not? Let's do it. All right. This Java Wolf says, "Hey, good to see you. You're always in the comments. Appreciate that." Oh, stream at 6 a.m. 6 a.m. for you. Yeah, imagine drinking a beer at 6 a.m. That would ruin my day. Alex says, oh, this is Sam Harris all over again. George just going to say there's something wrong with your brain if you disagree. I've literally had people say that because I claim not to have phenomenal states or to have this or that intuition that I am brain damaged. I've had people suggest that before. It's pretty funny. It's like, okay, well, if you think I'm brain damaged, I'll hop in an fMRI, do whatever scans you want. You could show me where the brain lesions are. I'm happy to do that. I haven't had anybody take up on that. I'm still looking through the comments. Discussion about what we should do about moral language. It's always a good discussion. Okay, that was pretty much it. Let's keep going.
Subjective part. And if it's not, then how is it not subjective?
Okay, is it objective or subjective that a blind person cannot see as well as a non-blind person?
That's such a strange question. Is it objective or subjective? What, objective? What kind of question is that? This is a weird question.
A blind person, a person that can see better than a blind person.
Yeah. That would be objectively true, right? That a non-blind person can see better.
Yeah, I mean, I guess he's throwing in that term better, but we could catch that out in descriptive terms. So that's not really going to be an issue, and that's probably what I would hope I would say. Is I'd say, whoa, hold up, better. Do you mean that a person that is not blind is able to process more visual stimuli than a person that is not blind? Because then that would be true, but it'd be a descriptive thing. So the normative stuff, you could just strip it out, and it's not going to be an issue.
Better than the blind person.
Yeah, but descriptive statements are easier to say whether they're objectively true or not. They're easier to ascertain just by the nature
really
of like, the physical world.
Yep.
So maybe what I'm not understanding here is the difference between it being objectively true that a non-blind person can see better than a blind person, and that a person with empathy who makes decisions based on empathy is just objectively morally better than a person who.
Okay, so in the case of the person that is not blind relative to the person that is blind, if we want to say that the person that is not blind has better vision, that could just be cashed out entirely in like functional descriptive terms. Like they have capacities that another person doesn't. So, we might say that a bird flies better than I do. Well, what exactly does that mean? Well, a bird is able to do things I'm not able to do. We don't need the normative language to make sense of that. But if you want to say that a person with lots of empathy has better moral judgments than a person that has like a lack of empathy, what exactly does that mean? What functional capacities do they have that the person that doesn't have a lot of empathy has? You could say what some of them would be. So a person with a higher level of empathy is better able to adopt the point of view of a person other than themselves. Imagine what it would be like to be that person. Yep. And they could say accurate things like, a person with high empathy might be better at, like, if you show them a picture of a person looking at an object and say, well, draw a picture of what it looks like from that person's point of view. Maybe they'd be better at a task like that. So there would literally be functional differences in a high empathy person relative to a low empathy person. And you can point to those and describe them. And there would be descriptive facts about the differences. But the issue here is that in the case of better, in the case of sight, there's just a clear, straightforward descriptive reduction. And in the case of better, in this other case, it's not clear what the descriptive reduction would be if there is one. And if there isn't, then better just means something different. Because better in the one case, we're getting this like naturalist reductive descriptive account. In the other case, we're not doing that. It's irreducibly normal. And then that better, he's just equivocating what's meant by better between the two cases. So either we could do what he's proposing, but it's unclear what that would look like, and it wouldn't have any salutary effects for any case that one's trying to make for a non-naturalist kind of realism. If it's supposed to be a kind of naturalist realism, then we're going to have other problems, because then we just say, okay, well then, yeah, it's descriptive, big deal. So a person that has more empathy fits some stipulative, descriptive set of considerations that you're just telling us. So a person, let's say we say moral facts are facts about what's conducive to cooperation. A person with a more functional empathic system is better able to cooperate with one another in terms of like negotiating, reaching agreements, and avoiding conflict, and devising institutions and norms and practices that minimize conflict. And so then we can say that the person that has a functioning empathic system is better able to cooperate in that way relative to a person that's less functional empathic system. That could be true. Again, though, it's just we're reducing it to descriptive facts. So that's giving you a pretty trivial type of realism at best.
Lacks empathy and does not have the physical capability to actually make moral
Because
decisions.
one's an empirical claim about your site that no one is going to disagree with ever, and one is a claim about values, which people will always dispute because values are subjective.
And those people
so sorry,
could
it's
be
not like I just jumped
objectively
in on
wrong.
this. I got some things to say about that. So I'm with Pat that I don't think that you can gain moral knowledge through empirical inquiry. I'm not a moral naturalist, I'm a non-naturalist. So I think that we understand values through rational reflection. Much like how, I'm going to just keep using this example because I think it's a good example of non-natural fact, but I don't know that there's no.
So he's so he's a non-naturalist. We obtain moral knowledge through rational reflection, not through empirical means. Okay, so I still have questions about what psychological processes are involved in this rational reflection. How does this work?
No true contradictions because I looked under a rock and it said it. Like I think about it and it seemed true. However, the move that then I disagree with Pat is saying, look, okay, so morality isn't an empirical domain and people disagree about it. Therefore, we have reason to think that it's subjective. Because I think there are loads of non-natural facts that seem
Did Pat
true,
make
like
that argument?
I just said,
Did he just attribute?
Nothing can be completely green. However, the move that then I disagree with Pat is saying, look, okay, so morality isn't an empirical domain and people disagree about it. Therefore, we have reason to think that it's.
Was that argument ever made? Because that seems like an argument from disagreement for anti-realism, but I don't recall hearing that argument.
Subjective.
Okay.
Because I think there are loads of non-natural facts that seem objectively true, like the one I just said, or nothing can be completely green and completely red all at the same time. That's not an empirical fact. Even
I actually think that if you have to cash that out, that actually is an empirical fact. I think all of these facts are built. Like, I don't think that there's this is controversial. I don't really think there are non-empirical facts. I think they're all existing on that. I think there's pragmatic truths, and I'm an empiricist, and I just don't. I think all of those facts are to the extent that I would say that they're true, they're only true in pragmatic sense. And the way in which we build up any of that knowledge is through interaction of the world, induction, abduction. They're all going to be empirical for me.
Even if I went in to the universe and looked at everything in the universe and saw nothing was completely red and completely green at the same time, that would tell me that nothing is completely red and completely green at the same time. It wouldn't tell me nothing can be. The reason I know nothing can be is because of my rational.
Yeah, I see. So it's some sort of like modal claim or like a claim about possibility, but there's nothing stopping an empiricist from saying, in the sense in which I think that nothing can be is the sense in which I don't expect there to be anything, or I wouldn't predict that there would be anything. So they don't really have an issue with reconstruing things in terms that don't require treating that as some sort of special a priori fact that's not empirical. They're just not required to think that way. So, some of the times when people are talking about moral realism and they treat the moral facts in question as these a priori facts, they'll start bringing up all these other things that they expect their interlocutors to agree are a priori facts. And I think interlocutors should just say, nope, I reject all of those. None of those are a priori facts.
Rational intuition. And also, like, people disagree about a lot of things. Like, people disagree about whether or not God exists, but presumably there's a correct answer.
So to the extent that anybody would have been, I don't recall, I've never heard any argument from disagreement. Maybe it was implied. Arguments from disagreement are not particularly good in and of themselves. So the fact that a bunch of people disagree about something is not a particularly good reason to think that there's no sense of an effect matter about it. That's fine. But again, I didn't hear that argument.
Wrong about that.
Yeah.
I don't think disagreement really implies subjectivism. And actually, if you look at
Yes.
subjective domains, we often don't really sincerely disagree. Like, I have food tastes. I don't like mushrooms, but when someone says that they like mushrooms, I don't like sincerely disagree with them. I might joke and say like, "Yeah, you're dumb for liking mushrooms," but I recognize.
Now, this is a point where I very much disagree. People dispute factors where it's not particularly plausible to think they're realists about it all the time. That doesn't mean they're anti-realist of any particular kind or are subjectivist, but people argue about, look, people give, what do you think's going on with Yelp? People rate restaurants. They argue about whether a restaurant is good or not. I don't buy this at all. People sincerely dispute whether what food is good, what music is good, what movies are good. I don't buy this at all. People argue about this stuff all the time. Probably argue about it more than morality. So, you'll hear realists say stuff like, people don't sincerely dispute factors, things that they're not realists about. I don't believe it. Okay, if they think that, then let's go do a big corpus analysis on what people argue about on Twitter. And let's see if people only argue about morality and they don't really argue about which movies are good or bad. I think that will very quickly show that this is very much not true. I don't buy this at all. This is another case where a realist will just make armchair empirical claims that I think could be easily proven wrong.
Whilst we're having the conversation, there's no.
And again, keep in mind, I'm sticking my empirical neck out. They're welcome to show me I'm mistaken about this. Good luck with that.
Facts from that. But when someone says like, "Oh no, animals don't matter," I actually do sincerely disagree with them. The same way that I would disagree about someone who thinks that the Greek pantheon are real or something like this.
Yeah.
There seems to be an implication here that disagreement would require just like holding contrary views about what the stance of independent facts are, and that's not a requirement for a disagreement. I sometimes point out that there's a trivial way of demonstrating how anti-realists can easily disagree within an anti-realist framework. Let's say that there are two cultural relativists; they're both members of the same culture, and so there's some fact of the matter about what is morally right or wrong relative to that culture. And one of them says abortion is morally wrong, the other says abortion is not morally wrong, and they're arguing about it. And they're both committed culture relativists. So they're both arguing about whether or not abortion is considered right or wrong relative to their culture. So in that case, they have a real disagreement. They disagree about what's true or false. And they're anti-realists. Not a problem. Constructivists have no problem with disagreements. If you think that moral facts are the facts that an ideally rational, fully informed agent would endorse, you can dispute what those facts would be. If you think that there's a particular constructivist procedure to follow, so if you say, okay, well, the principles of justice are the principles that we would endorse, and the original position behind the veil of ignorance, people could disagree about what principles they would endorse. So there is no problem at all for anti-realists of all stripes and colors and kinds and varieties of having disagreements, of disagreeing about what's true or false, disagreeing about what's right or wrong, disagreeing about what they should or shouldn't do. This is not a problem at all. And so when realists treat the alleged existence of disagreement as some sort of good indicator of realism about the domain, it's not. It wouldn't be an issue for anti-realists to disagree about stuff. And they'll make claims like people don't have disagreements about these other issues. What are they talking about? People don't disagree about whether mushrooms are good or bad. Watch. I'm going to go on Twitter. Let's see. See if people are arguing about whether mushrooms are good or bad. I'm looking. Maybe I'm not going to be able to find something very quickly. Maybe I need to show some disputes in another stream. Maybe it myself in a second. Yeah, I mean, you find stuff like this. Well, should I really share that? No, I'm not going to share Reddit. Fuck that. like I see a meme here that says, I love eating mushrooms. They're meaty and delicious, and I'm tired of people that call them disgusting. And it's like a person screaming and another person to me. Travis has talked about this. Would it be particularly strange? Would it be a weird way of speaking if someone said, I love mushrooms, and another person said, well, I don't agree. Or put it in another context, that's an excellent restaurant. I don't agree at all. People disagree with that way all the time. People disagree about what movies are good or bad. And they say, I disagree with you. They disagree about movies. They disagree about food. They disagree about restaurants. They disagree about colors and what shoes are cool or not. Those shoes are cool. No, they're not. People have disagreements like this all the time. And if you ask those people, do you think ultimately whether shoes are cool or not, is it a matter of preference? I don't know exactly what people would say. I think it might be really difficult to get people to understand this stuff in metanormative terms that comport with the philosophical categories. But at a first glance, I don't see any particular reason to think that these people are going to be realists about these things. And they might, on reflection, be anti-realist. And be like, yeah, and I still think this restaurant is good and these shoes are cool, and I disagree with people that don't hold the same view. What's weird about this? I don't know what the issue with this is. It's not like people can't apply intersubjective standards. Think about judges, people that are judging breakdancers. So is there a stance-independent fact of the matter about whether one breakdancer is better than another breakdancer? No, that's ridiculous. Does someone think that the breakdancing realism is true? That'd be in a completely insane position. So what do people that are judging breakdancers do? They agree on an intersubjective shared set of standards very roughly, and they judge people to the best of their ability according to the intersubjective standard. They're following roughly a constructivist kind of procedure. And they could certainly disagree. People do this in boxing matches. There's judges, they disagree. People disagree on intersubjective and constructivistic type ways of thinking about things all the damn time. All the damn time. People disagree about whether a move in chess is good or bad. It doesn't mean that there's a stance-independent fact of the matter about what moves you ought to make in chess or what moves would be good independent of your goals or values. There's just a shared presumptive agreement that typically in most contexts in which people are playing chess, they're trying to win. It doesn't have to be your goal that you're trying to win. It doesn't have to be. And you're not obligated to try to win independent of your goals. There's just a presumptive goal. And so to the extent that there are good or bad chess moves, they're intersubjective. They're based on the presumptive goal that one would have when playing chess. There's no inescapable, authoritative, normative facts about what moves you should make in chess. And yet we could still disagree on what opening is the best opening in chess, or whether a particular move that Magnus Carlsen made was a good move or a bad move relative to some other move he could have made. There is no problem with talking about this, about disagreeing in all sorts of contexts where you would have to be a complete bozo to be a realist about it. So I don't know what the hell realists are on about when they act like disagreement is some sort of win for, some big W for realism. Not at all. This is silly. It's really silly. And I do have to wonder, do they not think this through? This isn't that hard to think through. It's not that hard to come up with these cases. They're constantly talking about how much they draw anecdotes and alleged claims about how non-philosophers think. It's like they lose touch with reality. People argue about whether, I don't know, the new Joker movie is good way more than they argue about moral considerations. Good Lord. Of course people are arguing about that. And it's super implausible that they're cinematic realists. That would be silly. Oh, so it's just so frustrating to deal with what strike me as people just not taking the conceptual resources available to anti-realists seriously. Jeremy Gord says, Siskel and Ebert disagreeing about thumbs up or thumbs down probably did have similar brain areas firings. People disagree about empirical facts. Yeah, maybe. I don't know, because no one bothered to check. There is a little bit of metaethical neuroscience, by the way, and it doesn't unambiguously support realists. So, but of course they don't pay any attention to empirical evidence, which, for instance, we do not find good evidence that most people have realist intuitions. There's just not good evidence. Daniel Otis says morals are not the same as chess openings. Crow, did that get cut off? I think something that you said might get cut off. Yeah, there's differences. I'm not saying they're identical in every respect. Whether or not it's useful has nothing to do with whether it's an accurate model of reality. What is this in reference to? I don't know what you're referencing. Okay, let's go back to the video.
So I think just going off what Connor was saying there, Pat, do you not think that you could be making an appeal to popularity somewhere within your argument?
Disagreement is not my strongest argument for moral anti-realism. That was just a
Sure.
that I was making. So yeah, I agree. Like disagreement doesn't mean that doesn't prove it either way.
Okay, cool. Yeah, okay. Connor, what is your kind of strongest contention to anything that maybe Pat has said so far about morals being subjective?
Well, I mean, I covered most of the disagreement stuff. One thing that I am interested in hearing about is like, I feel like Pat isn't on board with me using seemings or appearances as sources of justification. And I'd be interested to know what you use as a bedrock source of justification, or if you are just like a global skeptic. Like, are there any premises that you just take to be true? And if so, why?
Not necessarily with normative claims. Like I think they all boil down to preferences. I think some preferences are better than others. But I don't think there is a mind-independent source of moral value. And I think most serious moral realists will make that claim. So the whole contention with moral realists and anti-realists is whether you can point to anything other than the human, or I say sentient mind, because I think animals have moral intuitions, for their source of moral value. So if you're sort of, and you're faulting about seeming, using seeming, what that term that you used for justifications of belief, I just think it's a weak justification when we have stronger, more rigorous arguments in anti-realism, because there's not that much to prove with anti-realism. Like we all exist, we all have preferences, therefore morality is based on our preferences, and until we find like a magical orb that dictates what is morally right or wrong, I don't see any reason to divert from that.
Right, but some of those premises, like, okay, we all exist. How do you justify that belief? Because I'm thinking you're justifying it because it seems to you that it's true, and you don't have a good enough reason to doubt it. Like it just seems obvious. I agree, it does seem obvious.
Yeah,
but I think that justifies that belief.
Yeah, so it's kind of a question about epistemology and what is reasonable to be believed in a specific situation. So I'm what you call a epistemic contextualist. So epistemic sorry, I can't talk with my braces. Epistemic contextualism is an approach to knowledge which says that you don't have to know every single thing about the world, every single deep question to know that your car is parked outside, or to know there's a microphone in front of me. So the standard or the burden that you need to prove is dependent on the context. So in this kind of casual conversation, if I tell George that I'm seeing Hamilton next week in October, he can probably take that to be true. If I'm in a court of law, then the standard is a lot higher. If I'm in some very serious, AI lab where the knowledge needs to be really, really succinct and really, really accurate, the standard changes again. So I think this is a reasonable approach because it doesn't require me to justify things to what I think is a very unreasonable belief, because like if you're not working within this framework, people can just say, if you don't know if there's a God or not, or if you don't know whether you're in the base reality and not in the multiverse, then how do you know you had orange juice? Which I think is ridiculous. So
yeah, but that does sound compatible with phenomenal conservatism. I could say that the standards for knowledge are higher in high stakes situations. But how do I get that knowledge? Well, it's because like some things seem obvious to me and I don't have reasons to doubt them. Like how do you go about justifying it? Contextualism is like a standard for knowledge, but how do you go about actually justifying some of your bedrock beliefs?
with your particular framework, I don't know a lot about, what's it called? Conservatism?
Phenomenal conservatism.
Phenomenal conservatism. It seems to me that something as important has, sorry? What's that?
Is an interesting choice of words.
It sounds a bit arrogant, Connor. No, it's not just conservatism, it's phenomenal conservatism.
Yeah. I mean, I think the phrase means phenomena as in appearances, and then conservatism is like taking things as they are without, and like just assuming that things are as they are until you have reason to doubt it.
Oh, it's a different semantic meaning when I say something.
It's not like related to politics or anything.
Yeah, no. For something as important as whether morals are objective or not, or whether they're subjective and very important philosophical questions, I would think that you would need something more than it just seems that way.
Connor, I actually have a question for Connor, actually, that can kind of maybe help him explain.
I don't know why people don't make the obvious move of just saying, it doesn't seem that way to me. And so now what? You're justified, I'm justified, now we got to go to the arguments. Like, this phenomenal conservatism is really serving as a kind of conversation stopper. If you don't just say, because like, imagine a person says, if it seems to me that P, I'm justified in believing P in the absence of defeaters. It does seem to me to be that P, so therefore I'm justified in believing P in the absence of defeaters. And you can just say, okay, well, if it seems to me that not P, then I'm justified in believing not P in the absence of defeaters. It does seem to me that not P, so therefore I'm justified in believing that not P in the absence of defeaters. And now you're at exactly where you were at the start of the conversation. So like, what work is these seemings doing? Is it shouldn't be very much. Like, even if the anti-realist agrees that it seems to them their stance of evident facts, which I find weird, but some anti-realists say this. Okay, so you both agree it seems a certain way. So now let's move on to the question of, is it that way? But that's it. This shouldn't really change what people end up talking about very much. And yet it seems to be like a big sticking point here. I don't think phenomenal conservatism, best case scenario, is a particularly big deal.
What you've just asked, Pat, because this would be good for him to clarify. Now, recently I saw a debate between Vegan Gains and that pro-extinction guy. Not in Mendham. There's literally a channel by this Indian dude called Steve called Pro-Extinction. And Pro-Extinction was arguing that like rape is objectively bad, and you can't compare it to something as trivial as whether pineapple on pizza is bad or good. Vegan Gains made what many people would see as an absolutely outrageous claim that whether you see rape as good or bad is the same as the preference as is pineapple on a pizza.
Yeah, and this is just normative entanglement again. So is the same as, I don't know the context of that discussion, but there's a big difference between saying that, like, I'm not going to use those examples because that example's awful. I hate when people just reach for the worst shit. But let's say it's just like murder and chocolate. So, hey, do you think murder is wrong and chocolate is gross, or chocolate is good, or whatever, are the same? Well, if you say that they're the same in terms of their meta-normative characteristics, what you're saying is that whether or not murder is right or wrong, whether that the statement murder is wrong is true, depends on a person's standards or preferences or values or whatever. Whether the claim like chocolate is tasty, likewise in the same way, depends on your attitudes and preferences. They're like the meta-normative characteristics are shared in common. It does not mean that you think that they're similar in any other respect. It doesn't mean that you think that the goodness or badness of murder is as unimportant as your food preferences are. So a person could think, yeah, they're both meta-normatively the same. That doesn't mean that you think that they're the same in other respects. So when people use this language of saying that they're the same, it's mega, mega, mega misleading. You're making it seem like someone that thinks like claims about whether the Holocaust is right or wrong, and claims about whether you should drink coffee black, whether coffee is good black or whatever. Those claims are the same kinds of claims. Saying that they're both, whether they're true or false as a matter of preference or something, it's not the same thing as, and it doesn't carry out any other entailments for the relative importance of those things to you on your perspective. And when people say that they're the same, they try to imply that, and it's just, very misleading and very, again, with the implication that an anti-realist isn't against really bad things to the same degree, with the same attitudes. Oh, so you're saying that torturing babies is just like pineapple on pizza? Just like it, in what respect? Be clear, damn it. Why can't people be clear about this? Are you saying that it's both stance dependently true that baby torture is wrong and stance dependently true that pineapple on pizza is good? Sure. That doesn't carry any implications that you think baby torture is as trivial of a matter, normatively speaking, as whether there's pineapple on your pizza. So why do they leverage claims like same to misleadingly imply this? It's so frustrating. I mean, all this conversation is realists saying misleading things to imply anti-realists are a bunch of psychopathic, stupid assholes, or idiots, or morons, or evil people, or whatever. Sorry. In this particular video, they haven't implied psychopathy or idiocy, but they have subtly implied anti-realists holding deplorable moral views. In other contexts, they've implied the other things, not in this particular conversation. But in this particular conversation, again, it's implied that the anti-realist has an outrageous view without being clear on what it is specifically about the anti-realist view that's allegedly allegedly outrageous, all by implying incorrectly and misleadingly that the anti-realist doesn't have exactly the same normative moral standards as the realist. So Vegan Gains, presumably, if Vegan Gains is an anti-realist, would say it's not the case that it's stance independently true that it's wrong, factory farming is wrong. So what? So what? Does that mean that Vegan Gains doesn't think factory farming is awful and repugnant, disgusting, and horrible? No, it has nothing to do with that. Why do people have to use normative entanglement to imply that if you don't share someone's goofy metaphysical views, that you don't hold the right attitudes about a thing, or you wouldn't act in the right way? There's nothing to do with it. Nothing to do with it. And they keep implying it. And I'm just so tired of it. How do they not know better? Come on. Think about this for 2 freaking seconds. Same. All the damn ambiguity. It's not that hard to be sensitive to ambiguity like I am. And I'm so tired of people acting like I'm a big, cog in like a big, I'm a party pooper. I'm like a wrench in the wheels for pointing this shit out that people talking philosophy just can't stop for 2 seconds to get clear on what the hell they're talking about and disambiguating. Isn't that part of what philosophy is all about? Is disambiguating and getting clear and being precise. And yet what I see with philosophers and people talking about philosophy in both professional and non-professional contexts over and over and over is not only are they not clear about things, is that they actively seem to strategically equivocate and exploit conflations to imply and insinuate. That's sophistry. And it's everywhere. And I do not see academic philosophers or people talking about academic philosophy pointing it out when it occurs in these philosophical disputes, pointing it out because the people doing this are smiling, they're sincere, they're not trying to employ rhetorical moves. I don't think that Connor or George or any of the people in this conversation that I disagree with are malicious. Not at all. They seem like cool, friendly, nice people that are perfectly agreeable, and yet they are for some reason pantomiming or imitating or mirroring or regurgitating rhetorical moves that were effective when other people used them. And these rhetorical moves have all these implications, and the implications are misleading. And I just wish they would be attentive to this and stop doing this. I'm sorry, it's so frustrating. I'd like to have a clear, straightforward conversation with people that disagree with me about the facts without the constant insinuation that if you hold a contrary view, like people do, this is not just metaethics. People imply if you reject their views about free will, that you can't be in favor of punishment. If you reject their views about consciousness, that you can't care about animals, or you don't think people matter, or you think nothing could possibly have any value, or you're so stupid you don't think people even have experiences. Oh, you deny consciousness exists. No, I don't think consciousness has the properties you think that it has. It doesn't mean I don't think it exists. Jesus Christ, it's not that complicated to explain. Person went around saying my Ferrari is magical, and it's an essential, non-negotiable property of the Ferrari that it's magical, and you don't believe that the Ferrari is magical. Imagine if they said, "Oh, so you don't think my Ferrari exists?" You're like, "No, your Ferrari is right there. I think it exists." No, because what I mean when I refer to my Ferrari is a Ferrari that, as a constitutive feature of its essential properties, is magical. By denying that I have a magical Ferrari, you're denying that I have any Ferrari at all, because this is a magical Ferrari. You're helping yourself to the presumption that a component of your claims that the other person holds as false is true, and that therefore they're committed to like a whole bunch of entailments that they would only be committed to if they thought some parts of your view were true, but they're rejecting all of your view. This is halfway fallacy. It's this same stuff you see over. It's like I could point to 5 problems and just say, it's problem number 2, problem number 3, problem number 1 again, problem number 1 again, problem number 2 again. It's the same goofy mistakes, inattentiveness to ambiguity, constant equivocation about the meaning of terminology. It's just exploitation of goofiness in language over and over. And it just never seems to end. And if I have to review every damn video, every debate, every video arguing for moral realism on the internet, I will review all of them, and it's going to be the same problems every time. And you will fall asleep, and I will fall asleep, because it's the most boring and ridiculous nonsense to repeat this over and over and over. And my prediction right now is that realists won't acknowledge that I'm right about this. They won't be responsive to my objections. They'll just increasingly avoid talking to me and eschew the conversation and just keep repeating the same crap over and over. It's just crap. It's not any better than the nonsense you get from Christian apologists talking about, oh, have you ever lied in your life? Then you're a liar. Kirk Cameron, Ray Comfort bullshit is the level that a lot of analytic philosophy is currently at least in the public discourse. It's pathetic, it's embarrassing, and I'm tired of it. Jesus Christ.
Pizza, good or bad? Now, as outrageous as that might sound, if moral subjectivists are right about what they say, then he actually has the point. Connor, you mentioned the mushroom thing a while ago. What is it for you that makes the Holocaust objectively bad, but preference for mushrooms subjective? Why is that? What's the difference?
Yeah, I mean, the main difference is that if I imagine a world where everyone likes mushrooms, it doesn't seem like mushrooms are disgusting, even though I happen to not like mushrooms right now. Whereas,
what? Okay, so there's a world where everyone thinks mushrooms. Okay, so right now I'm going to imagine a world where everyone loves the taste of poop. I don't know, feces. Okay, yep, feces are still gross. Nothing is different about the scenario. What is he imagining? Are realists just bad at imagining things?
if I think of a world where everyone approves of the Holocaust, it does seem like it's still bad. And Pat said that.
Again, does he think it's bad in this world? Okay, so there's a world where everyone thinks mushrooms are delicious. You still think mushrooms are gross. There's a world where everyone thinks Holocaust is good. Holocaust is still wrong. What is the difference?
Like seemings, I was like, we should have a very high standard for considering that we have moral knowledge, and seemings doesn't seem like a very good, like not good enough justification for it. But I mean, it seems that moralism is true to me, and it doesn't seem that anti-realism is true. So like anti-realism has even less justification. And considering that I think that appearances are the only source of justification, I think that realism is true. So like anti-realism has even less justification.
I don't know where he's getting the anti-realism less justification from.
I mean, it seems that moralism is true to me, and it doesn't seem that anti-realism is true. So like anti-realism has even less justification. And considering that I think
like it has less justification from his perspective, but not from my perspective. So why should I be a realist? We're not getting that. We're not getting an argument for this is just the Bigfoot stuff all over again. Hey, I've seen Bigfoot, so I know Bigfoot is real. Hey, God has spoken to me, so I know God is real. So what? So you should all believe in God? Look, if I hopped on this channel and told you I had a personal conversation with Jesus Christ, would that compel the rest of you to believe that you're not justified in not believing in Jesus? Because I spoke to you. No, it'd be strong justification for me, really, 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 really weak justification for the rest of you. Because all you would have is my testimony. Depending on how much you're going to update that Jesus spoke to me based on me claiming that Jesus spoke to me. Hopefully you wouldn't adjust too much because it's not particularly plausible, at least at first glance.
I think that appearances are the only source of justification. I think that, I think it is good enough.
Well, Connor, I'd just like to push back on what you said, because I think that your answer there, that's even to me, even though I lean towards objectivism, that seems still a bit wishy-washy to me about imagine a world where everyone likes mushrooms and imagine a world where no one thought the Holocaust was bad, blah, blah, blah. I actually still think that the difference here could be based on biology and actual physical things about the brain that we can examine. If you had the people who had the best taste receptors in the world, which is the thing we use to judge taste or whatever, they could have the absolute best taste receptors in the world. We put all those people in a room. They would all actually arrive at different conclusions about the taste of mushrooms, whether they're good or bad, or pineapple on pizza. The same cannot be said about the Holocaust. If you put 5 people with the most empathy in the world in the room.
5 people with the most empathy. Why is he adding that specific modification? Okay, so 5 people in the same room with that have the same taste receptors and same neurophysiological architecture that would prompt them to find mushrooms tasty. What? Wow! Why? This is really weird. Why does this?
They would just unanimously, it's universal, agreed that the Holocaust is bad.
Does he think that literally 100% of people that were Nazis had low empathy? Probably quite a lot of them had high empathy, and they were still like evil asshats. Empathy is an insulation against being a terrible person. Not everybody that's evil is a psychopath. Some people are evil in spite of their empathy, or possibly because of it. Like empathy is a very specific type of. It doesn't just automatically make you good. The ability to put yourself in other people's shoes, for instance, that doesn't automatically make you good. It's possible to have a sadist that's really good at it. They just love to imagine watching other people, be able to picture other people suffering. Empathy is no guarantee of being good. I don't know what he's on about.
Because of a physical capability that they have in their brain. So that is what I would consider the key difference there. It's a physical thing. That's why preference for mushrooms or pineapple on pizza is subjective to me. But I still am leaning.
Does he think those are not physical? These are all physical. All of these preferences, attitudes, beliefs, and notes are mediated in one way or another by physical differences in our nervous systems. Who cares? But it's not particularly relevant.
Towards Pat, the idea that the Holocaust or whatever is just objectively bad, because there's no person with any good amount of empathy who would say that it was good.
Yeah, see, is that true? Is that true? Is it in fact true that nobody with a good amount of empathy would disagree? I don't think that's true. I don't know where he gets this idea that people with high empathy. Does he think all people with high empathy are like only in favor of the things he thinks are morally right or wrong? There's probably very high empathy. I mean, this looks like a vegan channel. There's probably a lot of people that are very high empathy that are non-vegans and don't care about animals. And they're still high empathy. And then there's probably people that are high empathy that are complete assholes. What is he talking about? Why does he think empathy means you're good in some broad and general sense? That's not true. This is I think he might have a really distorted picture of what empathy is or does.
I mean, I would say on I mean, I don't know what you mean by best taste receptors. I don't know what the standard of taste receptor would even be.
Well, we can measure them physically.
I guess not being able to taste would be bad, but if you have intense taste receptors, I guess the best taste receptors would be if you have very intense taste and everything tasted good. That would probably be the best scenario.
Well, no, because because they were still all right. Things would still taste different to those people with the best taste receptors, the most, the highest amount of taste receptors. You know how all different animals have a different level of taste receptors, and some people taste things more strongly than others. They would still, all the people with the highest amount of taste receptors, or the strongest taste receptors, whatever you want to call it, who would be, there's still no way to call them the best judge of whether mushrooms are good. But I think people with empathy, those are the best judges of whether something is good or bad.
This is so deeply frustrating. Give me 1 second. So check out Paul Bloom's work on Against Empathy. I put a link here in the video. Paul Bloom raises quite a bit of objections to empathy. Let's see. I can't. Well, that's too late. It's almost 1 a.m. for me. But it's not at all clear that empathy is some sort of reliable tracker of people making morally good decisions. One of the things that Paul Bloom points out is that a high level of empathy makes you much more susceptible to focusing on specific individuals to the exclusion of people considered in the aggregate or statistical sense, and this can lead to poor decision making. Empathy is a specific type of cognitive capacity that has advantages and disadvantages. There's no particular reason it's a reliable indicator of making good moral decisions. So it's that there's some like a linear relationship between higher empathy and making better moral decisions. It's just not true. There's no particular good reason to think that's true. Like by whatever intersubjective standard you want to have for making good moral decisions. It doesn't do that. It doesn't prompt people to make good moral decisions. It prompts them to make more empathic moral decisions. And a lot of those we might in reflection disagree with.
And when someone says to me, oh, it's just subjective that what happens to animals is bad. Oh, I watched Dominion and I didn't feel anything. So, prove to me that it's immoral. I'm saying that person has some kind of cognitive impairment, essentially. They're not born with the capacity.
But cognitive impairment. Why is it an impairment? What are they not able to do that they should be able to do? This is a weird claim. Like, I would think it's unfortunate, but like relative to my values, I don't think that this is just so weird. What a weird direction this conversation.
That I have been born with to make moral judgments. And it's different with mushrooms. You could have two people who have the exact same capability to taste something, but they would still arrive at different conclusions that mushrooms are good or bad.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like it's kind of zeroing in on the same point. It's like an interesting way of illustrating it. But like, I think the difference is that when you just think about taste as a domain and you think about morality as a domain, it strikes us that there are some right answers to moral questions. And
there we go. It strikes us. Doesn't strike me. Sorry. No, it doesn't. Yeah. So it might strike realists that way. It doesn't strike me that way. And if realists want to make any claims about how it strikes other people, they're welcome to present the empirical evidence. Good luck with that.
There aren't right answers to taste questions. And like, you're not wrong for thinking mushrooms are disgusting. But it does seem that you're wrong for thinking that the Holocaust is good. It seems like you have a false belief.
I think subjectivists aren't going to be satisfied with your claim about, about just stuff seeming this way.
I want to touch on a little bit more on the seeming thing, because I don't have a problem with the seeming thing. I just want to know if it is your view that your seemingness, like that argument, is reliant on your own brain. And I know you're going to say yes, because it has to be, but are you making a claim to some other source, moral feature of the world that exists that dictates right and wrong? Because that's ultimately what moral realism is. If that's not what you mean, then I'm not even sure that you are a moral realist in the way that's like traditionally discussed in the literature.
Yeah, so I think that I'm referencing non-natural facts.
Oh, come on. He's clearly a realist by any standard. perception of what it is.
So like obviously it's not like a physical thing. And yeah, like I need my mind to reflect on it. But I also need my mind to reflect on, you know, the rules of logic. But I don't think the rules of logic are subjective. They're not like a physical thing, but they're rules that we understand through rational reflection. And if you think that modus ponens is a invalid form of inference, you're just wrong about that. You're just confused. So
but logic is the tool we use to help determine what's true or false. It's not like determining what's right or wrong. So it's kind of different to like a claim to a normative objective source. Logic is a mathematical tool.
So your point is, okay, non-natural facts exist and we can understand non-natural facts through rational reflection. However, normative non-natural facts don't exist and we can't understand those through rational reflection. Is that what you're saying?
All I want to know is
there's a profound lack of specificity in what the hell rational reflection is. What the hell is that?
What are you like basing your claim on about moral objectivity if it's not just your own head? Like what is it? Is it a feature of the world? Is it a belief?
Yeah.
Is it a substance? Like that's what I want to know.
It's a feature. It's like a necessary non-natural truth. It's a feature of the world that's true in all possible worlds.
And that is what though? Like
I don't understand the question.
exactly, because it's like it's just your own belief of it.
Yeah, but so are my beliefs of maths, but like that doesn't make it subjective or not true.
Well, it does if you can't point to your moral source. That's the whole problem with moral realism, because they make things like.
But where's my source of my understanding of logic? Like I just,
dependent on my mind. Where is it? Oh, I don't know. It just exists. Like.
This is pretty weird. This is pretty weird. I think I've had enough of this conversation for now. It's like 20 for me. I'm gonna make them. Let me just catch up the chat. Kilo, good to see you. Captain Death is also Bigfoot. Darren Extravagant says, if you give me time, then I want to change the subject. There's no subject anymore. I'm done with this video. Says, what are your thoughts on continental philosophy? Would you consider it? I just don't have the knowledge of continental. I can't even talk about continental philosophy. I did find someone that did a really cool video on continental philosophy. They explaining it in a way that I found very different. I think I found channel. But I'd like to talk. Oh, you said my voice input. It's probably because I've been moving the chair back. I still got to get the. I have the arm in the box up there. The mic arm. Did you say the audio is cutting out? It shouldn't be cutting out. Is it better now? So move forward. Anyway, I'm about to head out of here. All right. Well, yeah, that was just me leaning back. So the microphone is right here, and I just need to get down. But I'm out of juice. Sorry for getting a little yelly. I think Connor's going to see that and be like, "Oh my God, this guy is like super bad at this." Not. I see that kind of stuff happen a lot. Yes, I just burned myself out today with work, and that's my honest attitude about this stuff. This stuff bothers me, and that's why I'm so persistent. Wow, yeah, look at. I gotta get to sleep. But yeah, this stuff it bothers me. It bothers me because I would like to be in a situation where people disagree with me and I can move on to the next topic. But if people are not going to agree with me, that's fine. I can make for an interesting conversation. But I'd like to have like good opponents. Imagine you were an MMA fighter, and every time you got in the ring, all people did was just immediately kick you in the crotch. Every time. You're just like, I just want to have a fight. You just got to me crotch. And that's all they did. That's how it feels when I'm arguing with moral realists. Like, a lot of them won't step in the ring. When they do step in the ring, they immediately go for the crotch. Sometimes they don't, and then I'm delighted whenever they don't. But I have to wade through a lot of crotch kicks to get to those conversations. Realists don't have to be that. They don't have to rely on this rhetorical nonsense. They don't have to rely on the polemics. They don't have to rely on the bad arguments. They could do a better job. I'd like to have some competition, serious challenge, and 97% of the time, dealing with arguments from realists for realism or against realism. It's not a challenge. Boring, it's repetitive, it's tiresome. Your arguments are terrible. Step up your game because that's a competition. That's my first. So realists try to bring something better. That's what you got right now. It's not good. Well, how do you account for moral progress? Yeah. You can have progress on an anti-realist framework. I can progress in a video game that doesn't understand some facts about that. I can progress in culinary school that doesn't understand some gastronomic facts. There's just progress. Terrible. How do you handle, I don't know, whatever other argument? Deliberative instance. Yeah, it's not. When I deliberate on about moral or normative issues, I'm not trying to figure out the stance of facts. I'm trying to figure out what the not a problem. And it's just that you just knock them down like dominoes. I don't think any of these arguments are good. I never thought they'd get. Never encountered arguments that take much serious pause. Just like, and sometimes the people that present the arguments are very nice people, and I don't want to be mean to the people, and I don't want to tell people I think their arguments are a steaming pile of garbage, but they're just not good. Like an anti-realist could just be like, yeah, we got an account for that. And it's like someone said, it's impossible to climb up a mountain without Timberland boots on. And it's like, you just can. It's impossible to cook without olive oil. Yeah, well, I just did. I used avocado oil. Canola oil, whatever. But it's just, they say shit like that, where you're just like, no, you just can do it without having the thing that you say. How do you account for progress? Easily. How do you account for deliberation? Easily. How do you account for disagreement? Easily. It's easy. You're committed to saying this. No, I'm not. And I'm not required to say what you say I'm required. Well, but you say this thing. Yeah, so fuck off. Here's if I say a thing. It doesn't tell you what I do or what kind of person I am. Well, you're saying that baby torture isn't wrong. Yeah, there's some context where I might say it's not stance independently wrong. So fucking what? Who cares? It doesn't carry any implications about who I am or how I act or what I do. It doesn't matter. It's stupid ass words. You're gonna win a game by you're gonna win the war by saying, oh, but you would say this, that you would affirm this sentence that looks bad out of context. Yeah. So what? It's just crap arguments. Get some better arguments. Give me something useful to do. Stop pissing me off. You're nonsense. God. All right, I'll see y'all later. Realists, come up with something better. And do it soon. Because this is going to get real boring, and I'm going to have to move on to the film. Because it's ridiculous. It's always the same stuff. Oh, companions and guilt. Oh, well, if you reject moral realism, you'd have to reject epistemic realism. You don't want to do that. Sure, I do. I already did before I ever heard of this argument. All the forms of normative realism are silly. All of them. I don't think what's silly about it is the moral part. I think it's the irreducibly normative part. So if you're going to tell me there's irreducibly normative epistemic facts, I'm going to find it just as silly. It's not a threat to me. It's might as well say, oh, you're going to reject Bigfoot? Well, then you would have to deny the Loch Ness Monster. Yeah, that's exactly what I'm fucking doing. Jesus. Well, these arguments are terrible. They're terrible. Good night.